Jason Chaffetz right there on to the right of your screen. We expect it to start in just a moment. Very quickly, we want to tell you about some of the other programming coming up on the C-SPAN networks today. We have live coverage of the Values Voters Summit. We'll have coverage of the evening session starting at 2:05 Eastern with Donald Trump speaking to the gathering this evening. His message beginning at 3:30, live coverage right here on C-SPAN 2.
Good morning. I would like to call the Subcommittee on Transportation and Public Assets to order. And this morning's hearing, which is part of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, will focus on oversight of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's response to the Baton Rouge and Louisiana flood disaster. Pleased to welcome everyone. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. And the chair is also very pleased to note the presence of our colleagues from Louisiana, Congressman Garrett Graves of the 6th District, and also Congressman Cedric Richmond of the 2nd District, both of whom represent the affected area. We appreciate, again, your participating in today's hearing and welcome your participation today, along with the witnesses that have been assembled. The order of business will be that first I will ask a unanimous consent agreement with our minority that Congressman Graves and Richmond will be able to provide witness testimony at the beginning of our hearing and then participate in the member questions along with our remaining witnesses later in the hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I ask also unanimous consent that Congressman Graves and Richmond be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing, and also without objection, so ordered. The balance of the order of business today will be opening statements by myself. The ranking member, Ms. Duckworth, will also leave the record open for additional period of time. I guess we'll go for 1 week.
Sounds wonderful.
Without objection. And other members may submit statements. So with that, I will open with an opening statement. And as I said, we'll proceed with the order described. Then we'll recognize and swear in our witnesses, and we'll proceed with a hearing in that order and have questions after all of the witnesses have been heard. So with that, again, I welcome everyone to this important oversight hearing. I had the opportunity to be part of a call from our leadership on our side of the aisle a little less than 2 weeks ago. And in that conversation, we talked about the most important issues facing the Congress in the month we'll be in September prior to the recess. And top on the agenda was dealing with the emergency situation on the federal response in the Baton Rouge flood disaster area. And that issue was brought to the conference and leadership attention by Congressman Graves. That conversation took place on a Thursday. On Friday, we made plans for me to visit the affected area, and with the cooperation and direction of Chairman Chaffetz, went down and personally spent most of Sunday and all of Monday touring the area, visiting the affected sites, both on the ground and from the air, meeting with local officials to assess where we were. Chairman Chaffetz has also agreed, because of the emergency nature of the situation we find ourselves in, to have this subcommittee hearing at this point, and I think that's very important that we conduct immediate and thorough oversight, particularly in a disaster of this magnitude. As we all know, on August 11th, 2016, we had a natural disaster in the Baton Rouge area of Louisiana that brought torrential rains, probably a 1 in 1,000-year storm. That storm and the water, which inundated tens of thousands, in fact, we estimate, well, right now we have over 143,000 claims. That storm did incredible damage in a very unique manner. The damage estimates are incalculable right now, but I can tell you that more than 250,000 people have been displaced from their home, and many people are still in shelters. I think yesterday I got the report of over 800 still in shelters. When I was there a week ago, there were 2,000. This is a unique natural disaster in its implications, again, of its size and scope. It also is unique in that most of the country is not paying attention to, again, one of the most impactful natural disasters we've had in our country, probably since Hurricane Katrina. We've got some photos, too, that we brought back. The devastation is sprawling and endless. It's community after community, subdivision after subdivision. You can see people's, the contents of their homes in the streets. The Louisiana folks are the finest folks I have ever met in the face of a disaster, who have helped neighbors and friends and family got their homes, but both the contents and the parts of the structure that, again, were damaged are all in the streets. And this goes on mile after mile, neighborhood after neighborhood, town after town. About 80% of the homeowners did not have flood insurance because their homes were not located in a federally identified area that alerted them or considered that those areas would flood according to the maps produced by the federal government. After meeting with dozens of state officials, business leaders, and federal officials, my investigation and our work down there on that visit discovered some of the response by FEMA was not acceptable, and we unfortunately learned from this disaster and that visit some huge deficits in our federal response. We went through Hurricane Katrina and some other disasters. We had a $2.7 billion fiasco with trailers, some of which were found to have formaldehyde, but we spent all that money, time, and FEMA was to be able to address a natural disaster, one of this nature, with some housing. When I arrived more than 2 weeks afterwards, there was one unit, put that photo back up, there was one modular unit that had been constructed. Go back one more. If you look behind the debris, that was the single FEMA modular unit. 143,000 homes uninhabitable, and 2.1 weeks later, that was the only unit. There were 73 units that were not deployed in a field that I visited, and I was told another 40 in another field. even though 250 sites had been approved for receiving those units. We also found that many problems with those units because first the cost was about $60,000 and then it was about $20,000 to transport and erect those structures. So we had one up, not an acceptable response. FEMA should have learned from the mistakes of Katrina. Unfortunately, they were not ready for this disaster. They did not have housing. As of Friday, I was told there were 17 of those units now up. Again, 143,000 homes uninhabitable, more than 250,000 people displaced, and we had 3 weeks later possibly 17 units. Now, I'm told it may be a lower number, but that is not an acceptable federal response. A constant theme, unfortunately, has been FEMA's non-responsible and responsiveness, and sometimes providing contradictory information. When we visited Denham Springs, met with the mayor, and we'll hear from him, Denham Springs, probably 80% of the structures were affected in that town. Probably 50% of their business area was destroyed, probably will never come back. They did not have a disaster recovery center until 19 days after the flood. I met with the mayor, and the mayor actually, his contact, point of contact was on a slip of paper he showed me. He finally got a contact almost 3 weeks after the disaster in one of the most hard-hit cities in Louisiana. That's not an acceptable response from FEMA. And then emergency water, we heard repeated stories of FEMA water, which is supposed to be located to go in, took days, 4 to 5 days to actually get there. Only through the good graces and assistance of neighbors and friends did they have fresh water at some of these sites. We need to determine how many leftover or wasted funds from Hurricane Sandy that we could reuse and put towards Baton Rouge. We need to carefully examine all of the things that went wrong with FEMA and correct them for the future. No community or state should endure what has occurred in a federal response to the natural disaster in the Baton Rouge area. I encourage all those dealing with FEMA when I was there, to make certain that they had taken names, got commitment in writing for everything they're going to do, because they've already seen hundreds of people come in from all around the country making commitments, and these people will soon be gone. And already we've had the confusion of FEMA giving certain commitments to individuals and other folks at different levels of FEMA coming in and giving a counter opinion. So we're not in a very good situation. We've got to do better, and I know both sides of the aisle are committed to help in this situation. Let me yield to Ms. Duckworth, and then I want to yield a couple minutes to our chair.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing today. It's an important hearing because it's an important opportunity to make sure that the federal government, and in particular FEMA, is doing everything it can to help the victims of this flood in Louisiana. This hearing is also an opportunity to examine how FEMA's response to natural disasters has evolved since Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and how much has improved since the disastrous response to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The torrential rains that hit Louisiana over the last few weeks have been described as a 1-in-1,000-year event. Some areas received as much as 2 feet of water during the rains, and river levels rose to record highs, in some cases reaching as high as 6 feet. The harm inflicted was vast, flooding more than 100,000 homes and forcing thousands of families to flee. FEMA deserves credit for being prepared to respond quickly to this massive natural disaster, and I commend President Obama for expediting the major disaster declaration on the very same day that Governor Edwards requested it. While FEMA must continue working to improve its emergency preparedness and response efforts, it is important to recognize that in a short space of weeks since the flooding, FEMA has released over $450 million to help individual flood victims, placed 2,717 families in hotels and motels, and deployed 333 manufactured housing units to the region. As Governor Edwards noted, quote, "From the very beginning of this event, FEMA has been by our side and, quote, responsive to all of our requests." Of course, government is only one component of a comprehensive response. Americans from all walks of life have stepped forward to help the victims of flooding in Louisiana. I know from personal experience that engaging with our communities and helping others fosters a sense of shared sacrifice, and at a time when our politics seems more focused on tearing us apart than bringing us together, that shared sacrifice will help us rekindle the national unity that has made us the strongest nation in the world. During painful times of disaster and hardship is when we most need to come together in service to one another. I've been inspired by hundreds of AmeriCorps members who deployed to the flooded areas in Louisiana to assist with recovery operations. The leaderships of these Americans who are devoting time to helping others is why I joined forces with Congressman John Lewis and my fellow combat veteran Seth Moulton to introduce the 21st Century American Service Act, which seeks to ensure that all young Americans have an opportunity to serve their country through civilian national service. The efforts of FEMA Corps and AmeriCorps disaster response teams to support shelter operations, home cleanup operations, survivor call centers, and disaster survivor assistance teams is a real-world example of how national service can be a force for good in our communities and affect real change in American lives. I look forward to this testimony of our witnesses, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Chairman Chaffetz.
Thank you, and Chairman Mica, I want to thank you for your leadership on this and going down and visiting in Louisiana, taking time away from your family and your schedule for one of the worst disasters that we've had. So, Governor, mayors, thank you so much for being here, and for the FEMA representative, we appreciate you being here too. But you know what, FEMA, you got to get your act together. This response so far, what I've been able to see, the pictures I've been seeing, it ain't good enough. You know, Elijah Cummings talks about this a lot in our committee. We spend billions of dollars, everybody comes in here and testifies that everything's good and we're ready. And then when it really, really rains, I mean, my state, we get, what, 16 inches of rain maybe in an entire year? Y'all got 30-plus inches in 36 hours, I'm told. You got tens of thousands of people whose every bit of what they have in their homes is sitting out in their front yard. They can't even touch the toys that they have. And you've got a dozen of this and a dozen of that. It doesn't cut it. So I hope we're having as candid as the discussion as possible, but the response we've seen thus far is not acceptable. And we will keep dragging you up here in front of this committee because we hear it's all good. And then when it happens, it ain't so good. And these are real people's lives. Should not be a partisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. But when you have such catastrophic failure in trying to protect the people who need the help the most, and we're closing in on a month later, come on. So we expect some real answers, some real dates, and we are going to watch this every single step of the way. But I tell you what, your first 3 weeks, FEMA, not so good. And it's not acceptable. So I appreciate you having this hearing, and I want to have some real candid talk about what the reality is happening and how we're actually going to solve it. Thank you. I yield back.
And in accordance with our unanimous request, I'll recognize Mr. Graves, the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for hosting this hearing. Congresswoman Duckworth, you as well. Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz. I appreciate you all bringing attention to this issue. Look, y'all are aware of the statistics. Last time I talked to FEMA, this flood event has received 1/2 of the national media attention that the South Carolina floods received. And while it's never a good idea, I think, to compare disasters because there's such personal tragedy in them, it is amazing that there has been such a lack of urgency and knowledge and understanding of what's happened. This is a 1,000-year flood event, a 1,000-year flood event. This is something, and I'm going to rip a line from Mayor Shelton. This event could happen in any city. And I understand that folks say, you know what, it's not in my state, I don't care. It's not affecting my constituents. It does. Because what happens here, the precedent, allowing lackadaisical attitudes, allowing lack of priority, has a profound effect on what happens to our constituents. But when you have a disaster, whether it's an earthquake, an avalanche, a volcano, a flood, a hurricane, no matter what it is, a terrorist attack, it's going to have a profound effect, because if you let things slide, if you let folks take a lackadaisical approach here, it's going to be the same thing in your state. You know, I've tried to communicate with other members of Congress and compare this disaster. Chairman Chaffetz just talked about the fact that it was 31 inches of rain and comparing it to other places. The national American rainfall, the average rainfall for this country, is less than that, and we got it in 36 hours. Put that in perspective. 7 trillion gallons of water. 7 trillion. The reality is this. The Stafford Act is entirely insufficient to respond to this disaster. It is entirely insufficient. You can play tens of thousands of times over where people in South Louisiana are upside down in their mortgage, their jobs are underwater, literally. Their cars have flooded out, they've lost their clothes, they have nothing. And we have got to increase the urgency of the response here. You know, this has been an amazing community watching what's happened in South Louisiana. Everybody at home talks about the Cajun Navy. We didn't sit around and wait for people to come rescue us. We got together and rescued our own people. We did it. People trashing their boats, putting their lives on the line and their safety at risk to go rescue one another. We had the Cajun shelter set up where people opened up their homes, businesses, churches, and everything to shelter people. Cajun chefs popped out, pulling their barbecue grills out, cooking for tens of thousands of people, and the Cajun Army got together, and the Cajun Army did an amazing job going through and stripping and gutting tens of thousands of homes in South Louisiana. Let me be clear. This wasn't because anybody directed them to do it. It wasn't because they were paid to do it. They did it because that's what our community is about. But now we're in this position where the volunteerism, the generosity, the selflessness, it can't get us any further. Now we're to the point to where we actually need help. The housing unit progress is absolutely unacceptable. The fact that NOAA can come out in 2 weeks and say that this is attributable to climate change, fascinating to me. I couldn't even imagine that scientific calculation. This is attributable to climate change, but they can't tell John Doe on whether he's going to get a house or not, whether he's going to have a place to live, still living in their moldy home, still living in a tent, still living in a car. It is amazing what can happen when you prioritize things. You have a political agenda, you can make something happen. And talking about urgency again, in 2 weeks, NOAA can come out and do complex calculations to determine this is a result of climate change. Yet, in 30 years, the United States Army Corps of Engineers can't deliver the Comeat Diversion Project that was authorized by this Congress in 1986. I don't know how many times we're going to continue the stupidity of spending billions of dollars after a storm instead of millions before, making our communities more resilient. It is absolutely absurd, and this has a profound impact on the individual lives of many, many folks in South Louisiana. The parish that 2 of these mayors here represent, Livingston Parish, initial estimates are that 86% of the homes and 91% of the businesses were flooded. Think about that for just a minute. 86% of the homes and 91% of the businesses. It has devastated communities. It has absolutely devastated them. It's crippled them. Mr. Robinson, I appreciate you being here, and we've worked together for a long time. And again, I really do appreciate you being here. This is projected to be the 4th most costly flood event in United States history. I'm really scratching my head as to why Mr. Fugate is not here today. I don't understand that. I don't understand why he is not here. This is a huge event. Stafford Act, as I said before, we're blowing the sideboards off of Stafford Act. The White House needs to send an emergency supplemental request, including the unmet needs package of CDBG and other things to help address this, to help us recover. We need to have a more robust flood protection projects funded like Comeat, AMET, parish flood control projects and others to help lower the base flood elevation in this region. These things need to happen and need to happen right now. I'm going to yield back. I just want to, Mr. Chairman, very quickly note that we're joined by a number of folks that have been down there in the trenches through this disaster. In addition to the esteemed panel of the governor, governor and the mayors. We have our lieutenant governor, Billy Nungesser. We have our commissioner of agriculture, Mike Strain, state senator, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Bodie White, a number of other leaders from the state of Louisiana, and folks that have been in the trenches and tireless in their efforts to help recover. And looking forward to working with my friend Congressman Richmond over there on a full recovery package. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. And then, according to our unanimous consent request, recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond.
Thank you, Chairman Mica, for convening this hearing, and thank you for taking the time to come down to Louisiana. Let me thank Representative Duckworth, who has recently been to Louisiana, for her commitment to making sure that the people of Louisiana recover quickly. Let me just thank our governor, our mayors, and the regional administrator, Robinson, for being here today, because what you will do is shed light to what is actually happening on the ground. And my district took a hit in this storm, not as much as other congressional districts, but I lived through Katrina and Rita. And when we start talking about damage and we start talking about things, the one thing we have to remember, in Katrina we lost 1,500 lives. And we learned a very valuable lesson, and that was that the FEMA we had during Katrina and Rita was a FEMA that just didn't work, a FEMA that didn't make any sense. It's gotten a little bit better, but a lot of the rules, and I just want to be clear about this, because I want the mayors to understand that a lot of the rules that FEMA are operating under are rules that are set up by this United States Congress. And that Stafford Act, which is just a colossal mess, is our Stafford Act. And when I got here and I was elected, I took my memories of Katrina and Rita and introduced the FEMA Reform Act, which has not seen the light of day because it just has not been a priority. So I would hope that both sides can come together, especially after South Carolina, West Virginia, and all of the other disasters that FEMA has to respond to, so that we can make things make sense. And I think that you have to give the FEMA administrator the ability to waive the provisions of the Stafford Act when there is a different way that could create substantial savings. It makes no sense to me that we would spend $60,000 to $80,000 to bring in a trailer when that $60,000 to $80,000 could make that homeowner whole. But we can't, because the Stafford Act says that we cannot put any money into permanent housing. That's not a FEMA problem. That's a Congress problem. And let me just take a moment to thank the President for his continued communication and his declaration. And many people talk about the fact that we got to 90-20 on yesterday in terms of percentage. But the speed in which the disaster declaration was given is attributed to a couple of people, one of which is the governor, who could have chosen to do paperwork and send it in, but he decided to take our FEMA representative Stoller on a flyover of Central, of Denham Springs, and all of the areas that were affected, so that when he sent the letter up, the answer came back the same day to give that disaster declaration, which then opened the doors for relief. The problem is the relief that our citizens want and the relief that they need and the relief that they deserve is tied up in red tape, and we have an obligation to come together as Republicans and Democrats to help ease that red tape. And I just want us to understand what is happening. We talk about the American dream. People work hard their whole lives to invest in a home, which is the best way to transfer wealth to your next generation and leave a legacy. You work very hard, you get that home, you have your piece of the American dream, you put your family photos in there, you put your wedding gown in there, you put your kids' report cards and the happy birthday notes and the Father's Day and the Mother's Day notes. And in one day, you lose everything you ever had. And you can't replace it. But it's upon government to at least help to replace the bricks and the mortars that the value that that home carries in terms of the wealth it leaves to the next generation. And we should come together to, as a Congress, to pass a supplemental. And look, the President should send us a supplemental, but the delegation has to be on board. And I'm saying right now that our Louisiana delegation should unanimously request from the President a supplemental. That way it's crystal clear that our delegation supports it, the President supports it, and we can help move it through Congress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond and also Mr. Graves. I can't imagine what the two of you have been through. Again, I've never seen anything like it in my 24 years, and I've been to disasters in the Dakotas, Iowa, of course, before in Louisiana and Florida. But and then I have to comment, you had mentioned everything these people own. I was with Mr. Graves, and we went into one house that had been gutted, and you mentioned the photographs. That was all that was left, was water damage photographs on the floor of the gutted house. It almost brings you to tears because then you see in the front yard the rest of their possessions. Just an unbelievable situation of which the public and the Congress, it doesn't seem like it's really on the radar screen. But I'm pleased this morning to welcome a distinguished panel of witnesses. Incidentally, we're going to hold the record open for a week, as I said, for other members who would like to submit statements. But we'll turn now to our panel of witnesses, and I'll recognize them. Let me introduce them first. Welcome, Honorable John Edwards, Governor of the State of Louisiana, Mr. Tony Robinson, Regional Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Honorable Junior Shelton, Mayor of Central Louisiana, the Honorable Gerald Landry, Mayor of Denham Springs, and also the Honorable Rick Ramsey, Mayor of Walker, Louisiana. Welcome all of you. I don't know if you've testified before. We ask you to try to keep your testimony to about 5 minutes. And we, upon request through the chair or a member, will submit additional data or information into the record. It'll be made part of the record. This is an Investigations and Oversight subcommittee of Congress, and we do swear in all of our witnesses. So if you'll please stand to be sworn. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give to this committee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. And with that, again, I welcome all the witnesses, and let me recognize distinguished Governor John Edwards of Louisiana. Welcome, sir, and you are recognized. I have to pull that up real close so we can hear.
I didn't have the button on. Sorry.
Good.
Good morning, Chairman Mica. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, Ranking Minority Member Duckworth, members of the subcommittee. Appreciate the fact that Chairman Chaffetz was here, and also want to thank Congressman Richmond, Congressman Graves. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today to serve as a voice for the incredible people of Louisiana, who happen to be the most resilient people I know. I'm also proud to be joined today by Lieutenant Governor Nungesser and Ag and Forestry Commissioner Mike Strain. First, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for taking the time to travel to Louisiana to witness the devastation firsthand. It really is hard to imagine what the people of Louisiana are going through without seeing it for yourself, and we thank you for bringing attention to this disaster. Last month, an unnamed storm dropped over 7 trillion gallons of rain in South Louisiana, flooding more than 100,000 homes and claiming 13 lives. Roughly 30,000 search and rescues were performed, with 11,000 citizens being sheltered at the peak of the flood. There were 19,900 Louisiana businesses and 278,500 Louisiana workers disrupted by this flood. To put the truly historic nature of this flood into perspective, South Louisiana received more rain in 48 hours than the Mississippi River discharges into the Gulf of Mexico in 18 days. It was a once-in-a-thousand-year storm event that left 3 times as much rain in Louisiana as Hurricane Katrina did 11 years ago. And while the storm didn't have a name, every person that it affected does. Homes and businesses that had never flooded before were suddenly underwater. Many families lost everything, not just their homes. They lost priceless possessions that no amount of assistance can ever replace. Entire communities were uprooted, children were left without schools to return to, and thousands of small businesses, the cornerstones of these communities in South Louisiana, were destroyed. As of this morning, more than 140,000 households have registered for assistance with FEMA. Our early, and it is still early, estimates show that a minimum of $8.7 billion in losses have been sustained in the state of Louisiana in housing and economic impact, and that does not include public infrastructure damage. To put a dollar amount on the devastation thus far, the federal government has distributed nearly $500 million in housing assistance to the people in my state whose homes were severely damaged. And the floodwaters did not discriminate. Neighborhoods of all shapes and sizes were left uninhabitable. The story is the same whether you live in the more populated Baton Rouge or rural Lake Arthur in southwest Louisiana, where their residents stepped up and built a flood wall all on their own. The miles upon miles of sheer destruction is hard to imagine, and it's heartbreaking to see it as you travel the streets of South Louisiana. We call it debris when it's out on the side of the road, but that's people's lives. Those are the most precious possessions that they had. As the floodwaters rose, I requested federal disaster declaration for the affected parishes. Within hours, that initial request was granted by President Obama as to 4 of those parishes, and within the next 48 hours, 20 Louisiana parishes received major federal disaster declarations. At times, we were working both response and recovery simultaneously as waters receded in some places, yet caused more flooding in others. 26 parishes granted in this declaration joined an additional 36 parishes declared a major disaster for flooding that happened this past March. Right now, 56 of Louisiana's 64 parishes have received a federal disaster declaration for flooding based on both the March and the August events. Recovery from a disaster of this magnitude takes time and certainly an abundance of resources. And I'm grateful for the help that we've already received from FEMA and our federal partners and the outpouring of generosity from people across the country. The efforts of local government and these 3 mayors here certainly have performed extremely well, but also the faith-based community has been outstanding. And the people who have come from all over the country to volunteer to help has truly made a difference. And I want to thank the federal government for a quick response. We received word from the President yesterday that the federal portion of the cost share related to public assistance will be adjusted to 90% of the cost instead of the customary 75%. We certainly appreciate that. And from the moment we began monitoring this storm, the federal government has been alongside us as partners. FEMA representatives were actually at the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Protection as the rain started falling. And with our emergency preparedness team to streamline our disaster response coordination with the federal government. And I've had the opportunity to meet with Administrator Fugate in Louisiana on 3 separate occasions since this storm happened. I also have had an opportunity to meet with Tony Robinson, who's sitting to my left, and you're going to hear from him in a minute. And together, he and I and a team of folks traveled to just about every parish affected by the flooding, both while we were in the response and as we transitioned into the recovery. So I'm thankful for the quick response that we've received, but I am under no illusion that the response has been perfect. And I, like you, urge FEMA to ramp up the delivery and installation of manufactured housing units in Louisiana. While the response in terms of receiving manufactured housing units after this storm has been the quickest in terms of any other Louisiana flooding disaster, it certainly has not been fast enough for our families who've lost their homes and have no place to go. Nearly 1 month after this flooding began, 662 families have been approved for manufactured housing. However, only 48 manufactured housing units are currently in the process of being installed. So I'm asking FEMA to explore ways in which it can expedite this process to ensure that those who have been impacted by the flood can transition more quickly into a stable living environment. I recognize that this is not the FEMA of 11 years ago, but we can always learn how to best serve those in need. We can always improve our response to disasters, and we can always strive to make times of disaster easier on the people who are impacted. Floodwaters in Louisiana touch places that have never flooded before and are not in flood zones. This has put many of our local communities and homeowners who were in compliance before the flood in the untenable position of not being able to rebuild their own houses, even though the flood maps will not even be changed as a result of this event. 80% of the homeowners whose homes were damaged did not have flood insurance. Louisiana has learned from the aftermath of other weather events like Superstorm Sandy how to effectively mobilize from response to recovery as we work to address the housing needs of individuals and families displaced by the flood. Our state has implemented an innovative housing program called Shelter at Home, and this program enables eligible individuals or families whose homes were damaged to take shelter in their own homes while they rebuild if those homes can be made safe, habitable, and secure with $15,000 of work. And the people want to go home. The focus of this program is simple. We want them to be able to go home and back to their communities, their schools, their churches, and their places of employment. And while it doesn't make a family whole and it doesn't fully repair a home, it does help the families get a jump start on their full recovery. And we're operating this program in partnership with the federal government, and we've had more than 17,500 homeowners register for the program in the 2 weeks since we launched it, indicating a real desire to return home and to a sense of normalcy. And it is within this framework that we traveled to the nation's capital yesterday to seek much-needed assistance for our state's recovery efforts. And I'm calling on Congress, respectfully requesting Congress to support a supplemental appropriation of $2 billion for community development block grant funds to allow for public investments in housing, economic development, and resilience infrastructure. Louisiana's housing need is projected to exceed $1.2 billion alone, with an outlook of $3 billion in economic loss, including $110 million in losses to the farming community, and the preliminary estimates of $8.7 billion in damages that do not include public infrastructure losses. The $2 billion request for CDBG funds is a necessary step to rebuilding Louisiana, and simply put, we cannot recover without it. I'm also asking Congress to clear the $724 million backlog of Federal Highway Administration emergency relief funding to ensure that our state can effectively manage the rebuilding of infrastructure crippled by the flood. Rising floodwaters forced the closure of over 200 highways statewide, including every single interstate in our state except for one. There were approximately 30 state roads that were washed out as a result of the flood. And by clearing the emergency relief funding backlog, Louisiana would be able to receive $14 million from the March flood and $25 million from the August flood to help address our most critical infrastructure needs. And although this was a 1,000-year flood event, it is imperative that we protect our state and citizens from more extreme weather events in the future. And to that end, I join with Congressman Graves in requesting $125 million in funding for the Corps of Engineers to fully fund the Comeet River Diversion Project, which has been on the books and underway for 20 years. The completion of this project, coupled with the completion of the Amite River Basin Study, will allow our state to rebuild communities in a safer and more resilient manner. I also believe that it's critically important to address the social service needs of Louisiana families, particularly children who've suffered through the trauma of this disaster. The ability of our state to provide quality mental health and support services to disaster-affected populations is crucial. And to that end, I'm requesting a supplemental appropriation of $92 million in social services block grant funding to provide support services to the vulnerable individuals and families affected by this disaster. Louisiana will move forward. The resilient spirit of our people will never cease to amaze me. but we still need help to truly and fully recover. We have a long road ahead of us to meet the needs of our citizens, our communities, our economy, and our infrastructure. And I look forward to working with Congress with the support of Louisiana's Congressional delegation, as well as with this administration and the next, to ensure that our great state fully recovers from the historic and unprecedented flooding that has turned too many lives upside down. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Governor. And we'll go now to Mr. Tony Robinson, the Regional Administrator for FEMA. Mr. Robinson, you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Duckworth, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Tony Robinson, and I am the Regional Administrator for FEMA Region 6, which includes Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and the 68 federally recognized tribes within that geographic area. I welcome this opportunity to discuss FEMA's role in the response and recovery efforts to the flooding disaster that took place in and around the Baton Rouge, Louisiana area between August 11th and August 31st, 2016. I also welcome this opportunity to publicly commend the state and local elected officials sitting at the witness table today, as well as local first responders. These are dedicated public servants who are working tirelessly to serve the needs of their neighbors and communities, and I appreciate all that they have done and will continue to do. On August 14th, Governor Edwards verbally requested, and the President quickly granted, a major disaster declaration under the authorities of the Stafford Act to provide assistance in 3 broad categories: public assistance, individual assistance, and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Yesterday, the President approved the 90% cost share for all public assistance costs for this disaster. The President's announcement of the cost share adjustment is another step in the administration's ongoing response to the flooding in Louisiana. FEMA's public assistance and individual assistance programs are made available in areas designated as part of the Major Disaster Declaration, while the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is authorized across the state. During the response and recovery phase of the disaster, FEMA works to support the state as the state works to support its local governments. For example, if a community identifies a shortfall in its capability to support its residents in the wake of a disaster, the community calls upon the state to identify resources to fill that capability gap. If, however, the state determines that it does not have the resources to fill the gap as identified by the local officials, the state then turns to FEMA to draw upon federal resources to fill that gap. Even so, FEMA is moving aggressively to make sure it is properly positioned to provide federal assistance when a state requests it. On August 12th, in advance of Governor Edwards' request for federal assistance, FEMA deployed incident management assistance teams to Louisiana to coordinate with state and local officials on life-saving and life-sustaining operations. In support of survivors, FEMA delivered more than 2 million liters of water, 1.3 million meals, 17,700 cots, 12,500 blankets, and 2,000 tarps to the state. At the request of state and local officials, FEMA also deployed a national urban search and rescue task force to supplement local search and rescue operations, and also issued a mission assignment for a national disaster medical assistance team to support the state's medical shelter operations. Along with the state, FEMA is prioritizing housing options for survivors as we continue to work with the state-led housing task force to identify options that meet the unique needs of disaster survivors. There are several options available. As you know, and as the Governor stated, on August 24th, the Governor announced the Shelter at Home program that, with funding support from FEMA, will allow residents who qualify to safely live in their own homes as temporary shelters while they plan and carry out permanent repairs. The Stafford Act prescribes that individual assistance programs provide funding to assist survivors with repairs to their homes, for rental assistance, or to assist with other needs like cleaning costs. As of September 7th, FEMA has provided more than $584 million of assistance to individuals, of which $494 million was provided in the form of housing assistance to more than 138,000 households. Furthermore, FEMA has activated its Transitional Sheltering Assistance Program on August 19th to allow eligible disaster survivors to be temporarily housed in participating hotels or motels. Flood insurance is one of the best ways to protect homeowners and renters from financial impacts of flood events. As of September 7th, over 28,500 claims have been filed with the National Flood Insurance Program. In an effort to speed repairs and recovery, the NFIP authorized and issued $247 million in advance payments to NFIP policyholders in Louisiana who sustained damages, providing expedited relief to disaster survivors. When no other solution fits the circumstances, FEMA may provide for HUD-approved manufacturing housing units to provide a middle-term housing solution to survivors for up to 18 months. As with many of the other efforts, we work closely with state and local officials to ensure that the placement of these MHUs is consistent with floodplain management regulations, state and local zoning codes, standards, or ordinances, and is consistent with the needs of the local communities. We continue to work closely with the state as they engage their local communities and identify projects eligible for the public assistance program. The state has scheduled applicant briefings and kickoff meetings with local officials. In each of these briefings and meetings, FEMA will work side by side with the state and support them as they support their local communities in their recovery, planning, and execution. In conclusion, FEMA is working to support the state of Louisiana as the state supports its local communities and residents. While a lot of progress has been made, the recovery from this significant disaster will take time. As local communities identify capability gaps or shortfalls with the state, and the state calls upon FEMA to assist with filling those gaps, FEMA will marshal all the resources of the federal government that the law allows to fill those needs. FEMA will be there to help survivors until our job is done. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, and we'll withhold questions till we've heard from all of the witnesses. The Honorable Junior Shelton, Mayor of Central Louisiana, welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members. We appreciate the opportunity to come here today to speak to you about what is happening in the local municipalities. Let me begin by saying that what I say here today has to do with the procedures, the rules, the regulations, not the people of FEMA. Mr. Robinson has worked very closely with us. In fact, I wish FEMA was rife with people like Tony Robinson. I wish he was cloned and we had a lot of him. But unfortunately, it's not so. And because of that, we have some problems, and I wish to outline those. I was going to read a speech, but I decided I just want to speak from the heart and let you know what exactly is happening in our city. Let me give you some statistics. The city of Central was incorporated 11 years ago. We're a young city. We have 27,900 citizens. Of those 27,900 citizens, approximately 25,000 were impacted during this flood. 25,000. We have 11,100 residences in the city. We estimate nearly 90% of those homes were damaged significantly. And when I'm talking about damage significantly, I mean at least 2 foot of water or more. Congressman Richmond said it best when he said, this is not about property, this is about lives. What you see in pictures that have been handed to you, the debris that's out there, that's not debris. That's people's lives. Can you imagine if you were 60, 70 years old and you lost everything that you had? How do you start over from there? Quite honestly, we have mental health problems taking place in these municipalities that are represented here today. We have suicides. We have mental breakdowns. We have families being torn apart because honestly, they don't know how they're going to get back on their feet. Let's talk about the response from FEMA. I understand the hierarchy, that FEMA is to work with the governors, the state governmental agencies. And I want to compliment our governor and our state for the work that they have done. I have no complaints whatsoever from there. However, it is important that this gets drilled down to the local municipalities because that's where the problems are. I should not have to go to the governor's office with individual problems presented to me by my citizens. We should have contact, constant contact with FEMA. 21 days following this event is when I got a liaison appointed to me. Nice lady, but she has absolutely no authority. Every question I've asked her, she's had to go up the chain, and I can only imagine how that chain is placed upon her to try to get answers. So I don't blame her, I blame the system, and that's what we're here today to talk about. Disaster recovery centers. There was an announcement that there was going to be a disaster recovery center set up in East Baton Rouge Parish, one. And I went ballistic on the radio that a parish as large as East Baton Rouge Parish was going to have one disaster recovery center. Within the day, I had a call from FEMA saying that we would have one. And I think it's only because I got out there and complained about it. Now, it was explained to me that there was going to be more disaster recovery centers set up, but the information being given to the public made it sound like only one was going to be there. That disaster recovery center is often the first contact anyone has with FEMA representatives. And they're asked a series of questions. And I must tell you, after hearing the series of questions, I believe they're set up to exclude people instead of categorizing their needs. Let me give you an example. If someone were to say to them in that interview, do you have a place to live? And they say, well, yes, I'm staying with my in-laws. They're immediately put off on the side saying they don't have a housing need. We all know that's not acceptable. Instead, that question should be, how long will you be able to stay there? Well, maybe a week. Okay, we'll get back with you in a week and see if you still have housing needs. Instead, it's put on that citizen in this time of turmoil and unrest to have to come back to ask for housing. That's unacceptable. These people need help. They don't need to be put off to the side and make them come back to ask the questions. We had a town hall meeting that was set up by FEMA. We were elated about that. We had 1,200 persons come to a church to hear questions being answered by FEMA. They weren't answered. Had it not been for representatives from the governor's office, there would have been very little substantive answers given there. The very first comment that the representative from FEMA said to this group of 1,200 citizens seeking help was, hey, if we tell you no, come back and ask us again. That's telling those citizens, we're trying to put you off, we're trying to wear you down, instead of, hey, we're going to try to help you. We're going to try to figure out your needs. They're trying to exclude instead of include. The MHU, or Mobile Housing Unit issue, that should have never been an issue. I want to give you a statistic that not many people know. In East Baton Rouge Parish, or county, we had 33,000 homes flood that are not in the flood zone. We had 31,800 flood in the flood zone. You heard me right. We had more flooding outside the floodplain than we did inside. But the policy was an MHU does not go in a flood zone. But yet we're going to put them in the flood areas that outflooded even the flood zones. So that policy should have been eradicated from the very beginning. And this goes back to my point I've been saying time and time again, that instead of having these this one template to take care of every disaster, you need to have templates for each type of disaster, a trigger that puts a certain team into place for certain events. And we're going to go back to the idea that this is not an event that's like an earthquake that might only happen in California, or tornadoes in Oklahoma or Kansas. This is a rain event that can happen in your hometown. And we better get this right, or it's going to be you sitting on this side of the table giving this testimony. There's one issue that has really disturbed me lately, because it's something that we're faced with now, the major issue. Are these citizens going to have to rebuild and raise their slabs? That's the number one question right now. But yet in the local newspaper over the weekend, there were 2 articles written in which FEMA was stating, hey, we're not telling them to raise their slabs. It's the local municipalities and their ordinances that will do that. What they left out is those local ordinances in the municipalities have to agree and have to be meeting the rules and regulations from FEMA. So quit putting the blame on the local people. We want them back in the homes. We want them to have help. So in conclusion, I just want to say that it's astounding to me that I'm sitting here today, that Congress and the President can send millions and billions of dollars overseas, but yet our own citizens have to beg and plead for help. Those citizens who put that money in the coffers that can be sent overseas, all they want is help now. You were given some pictures from the city of Central. I ask that you look at them. There's a picture of a very typical street where you see the debris that might be 6, 7, 8 feet tall. That's their lives, as we talked about. In addition to that, there's a couple of family pictures there. And I want you to look at those. I want you to look at the faces of those people. They're proud, but they're broken. They're hopeful, but they are shaken. The city of Central will take care of our citizens with or without federal government help. But I'm here today pleading with you, please, help these people with these lives. It's American families looking for help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And now we'll recognize the Honorable Gerald Landry, Mayor of Denham Springs, Louisiana. Welcome, sir, and you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman, and thank you for the invitation to share some information with you all today. It is true that 90% of my homes in my city received water. 90%. It's hard to comprehend that many homes had water. Of the 4,200 homes, about approaching 3,000 had over 18 inches, and that triggers the mitigation piece that we are so concerned about going forward. But this is such an unprecedented event when you have 25 to 30 inches of rain in 72 hours. We talked about trillions of gallons of water coming down upon us. It is unbelievable what we have just gone through. And we talk about so many of these folks, 70, 80% of the folks did not have flood insurance. Well, the reason they didn't have flood insurance, we've never had that issue that bad. The crest of the river was 5 foot above the highest recorded flood stage that we've ever had back in 1983. How do you even prepare for that? So our folks at least in my community, don't live there without flood insurance because they want to live dangerously or because they can't afford it. They didn't need it. So this is such a unique and rare event that has occurred. It has just devastated all of us. We can go into great detail about the response from FEMA. I have documented a lot of that in my brief that I have submitted to you. But the biggest single issue, well, there's two big issues. One is the inconsistency of the information that is given to us and to our citizens, and the mitigation piece. We talk about mobile housing units and how we need those desperately so that our seniors can get back to their homes and that our kids can get back to school because school starts again in a week or two. They need to be back in their communities. They need to be able to go back home and live in their driveway in a trailer of all things so that they can put their houses back together again. But it starts off with, Mr. Myers, you need a trailer, so we'll get you one. And then the next day or two, somebody comes back and says, oh, no, Mr. Myers, you can't have it because you're in a flood zone. Well, FEMA guidelines say you can't put one in a flood zone. Well, who needs one more than anybody else than somebody that just got flooded? So that there's no rhyme or reason there. And we were instructed last week, okay, FEMA has relaxed the guidelines. We can now have mobile homes in a flood zone. But you heard me talk about Mr. Myers. He's a 90-year-old war veteran. Guess what? FEMA went to his home just Tuesday and said, no, we changed our mind again. You can't have the... Where is the consistency in the message to our people? And you want to know why our people are frustrated? Because they don't know who to turn to. They cannot get the consistent information that they need to make an intelligent decision. So to say that I'm disappointed and frustrated and angry is an understatement. My community, unlike Mr. Shelton's, is very old. We've been around since 1828 when Mr. Denham came and discovered some springs, hence the name Denham Springs, and it was at that point in time when this community started to flourish, and we have large families, a lineage of generation after generation, and such a strong sense of community, and that we all pull together and we all support each other. And so this disaster is about real people. It's not something you just see on TV and you don't connect with, but we are definitely all in this together. My community has an antique district. And the buildings go back to the early 1900s. We have football. Everybody has football. We also have football. But you know what it is? We sell season tickets, and we sell out of season tickets every year to high school football. That's the kind of community that we have. Our citizens love our city, and I love my citizens. And I'll try to be their voice. Another 90-year-old, Mr. Hewitt Underwood. Mr. Hewitt served our country in the Second World War in the Coast Guard, has always been to the veterans, has always been attended every veterans function. He's such a proud man. And now his home had 57 inches of water. He has a bride of 59 years is how long they've been married, and they want to just go back home, but with the possibility of having to elevate their home and a cost of about $100,000, he can't afford that. The home is only worth about $100,000. He's 90 years old. He just wants to go back home and live the rest of his life in peace and enjoy his kids and his grandkids and his great-grandkids. To show you how dedicated he was, some of the possessions that he had they were able to remove them from the home before the floods, and then after the floods they went back to go and retrieve some of those. And when Mr. Underwood walked into his storage room, the first place he went to was the drawer where he kept his medals, all of his service medals from the military back in the Second World War. That's how much he served his country. That's how much he loves his country. But now the country is not serving him. With the ridiculous guidelines and the procedures that FEMA subjects him and his family and everybody else in my community and these other communities is uncalled for. It's unbelievable. You have to be on the ground to truly understand exactly what our folks are going through. I would challenge anybody from the FEMA headquarters, play undercover boss. Come to my city. Go work the streets and see what your folks are telling my people. I had a 70-year-old gentleman in my office just yesterday, in tears. He was out of town during the flood event, came back home, drove into his driveway, saw the devastation. His wife had a heart attack. Now, she is in Hammond, 30 miles away, in a hospital. Her sister is taking care of her while this poor guy is back at home trying to take care of his possessions, trying to gut out his house. And a FEMA rep goes to him and says, well, I'm going to tell you what, you got to tear your house down. It's devastating. It's devastated. It devastated him. He came to me. He said, Mayor, what am I supposed to do? And we sat down and we talked, and we're okay. But the response from FEMA has been totally uncalled for. So in closing, my biggest challenge to you is to make FEMA change the mitigation piece, because if I had 3,000 homes that had more than 18 inches of water and they are deemed as substantially damaged, they want us to elevate them. That will be the death of my city. I received an email the other day of a guy that lives on Geraldine Drive. 4 of his neighbors have already said they're leaving, and he's strongly considering doing the same. That piece does not need to go into effect. Please suspend it. Please use some common sense. The fact is you're going to make somebody raise their house on a 1,000-year event, a rain of such epic proportions nobody could ever comprehend what was going to happen. So do not, please, I ask you, please do not make us raise our homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. And we'll now hear, thank you for waiting patiently, to Mayor Ramsey. Mayor Rick Ramsey, Mayor of Walker, Louisiana. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you, sir. And again, thank you, Chairman Mica, for coming to Louisiana and viewing what devastation and what we've been going through for the past 3 weeks, and for calling this hearing. I think that's extremely important. I want to reiterate what my 2 mayoral colleagues have said. I agree with every point that they've made on FEMA. My experience with the FEMA representatives on the ground is that they're actually caring people that feel the hurt and the needs of the citizens of our area. The problem is their hands are tied. The bureaucratic maze that they have to weave their way through to get anything done is impossible. The other issue is that, from what I've seen, probably 50% or more of them are either rookies that have no experience with a previous disaster, or part-time employees that have no previous experience. We had a large group that were brought in from Puerto Rico that really has no idea what Louisiana is about and what we're going through in this area. They're good people. They're trying. Their hands are tied. They cannot do anything. There's too many rules. There's too much of an effort to make this a cookie-cutter approach. I've heard 100 times, look how much we've improved since Katrina. And I said, in all due respect, I see no improvement since Katrina. This is not Katrina. This is a blue-collar community where the people work. They go outside. They want to come back. They want to fix their homes, and they want to get back to work. And that's what these two mayors are telling you. And it's the same thing in the city of Walker. I think we're getting no national attention because there's a national misconception about Louisiana. We're not below sea level. We don't all border on the ocean. We aren't all on a river that floods. My city is east of Denham Springs. It's 6 miles from the Amite River. It's 100 miles from the coast. It's 32 to 40 feet above sea level. I can give you statistics from Wikipedia, and I know that's not a scientific basis, but San Francisco at 11 feet, Boston at 20, New York City at 13, Portland at 27, Philadelphia at 21, and they list Washington, D.C. as 16 feet above sea level. My city flooded at 32 to 40 feet above sea level. The problem is our flooding was different this time. Yes, we had a catastrophic rain event. We were prepared for a heavy rain event. We have a really good meteorologist in Baton Rouge, and he called us and told us, be prepared for a 1983 flood event. We were. Our canals were cleaned. Our culverts were empty. Everything was ready. We expected double-digit rains. It's not unexpected for our area. We get a lot of double-digit rains in Louisiana. We've endured Juan. We've endured Allison. We've endured Rita, Katrina, the unnamed storm of 2013. 17 inches of rain is nothing unusual. We got 27. Yes, that's unusual, but that was over a 7-day period. Our drainage was holding. Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Manchac were at low levels because there was a westerly wind. Our drainage was holding. On Saturday afternoon, when the rain stopped, I believe that was the 13th, water fell 3 to 4 inches in Walker. 3 to 4 inches. People quit worrying. They went into their homes. They drank a beer. They watched TV. They were celebrating. And at 10, 11 o'clock at night, water came up to their beds. We had a wall of water come down Interstate 12, 5 to 6 feet in depth. This interstate was just completed less than 2 years ago. It's the city's contention that we raised the flood elevation in our city by 5 to 6 feet. Areas that would not have flooded. Yes, it's a 1,000-year flood. We would have had minor to moderate flooding in Walker. Instead, we had catastrophic flooding in Walker. We had homes that were built above the base flood elevation that took 3 feet of water. My personal home had over 5 feet of water, built in '73 and never flooded. Through every rain event since 79, never flooded. This is unacceptable. We have a situation in southern Louisiana where a barricade is being built across our interstate system. Good intentions, absolutely good intentions. It was to save lives because we had lots of collisions on the interstate. We lost 13 lives in flooding, but you're not hearing about in the city of Walker where a 67-year-old man put a rifle to his temple in the Best Western Plus and killed himself 2 days after the flooding, or the mother who took a knife and cut the throat of an 8-year-old daughter and then killed herself after the flooding. Did the flooding cause that directly? No, I can't say that. Was it a contributing factor? I think there's no doubt, and I think everybody agrees with that. I've submitted pictures to your group. I've submitted thumb drives to your group. I would love for y'all to review them, the videos that show this. You know, we're not a group that likes to go out and ask for help. The hardest thing I've had to do is to ask people to help me in my home. Louisiana people, country people, they take care of themselves. This has been devastating. I'm looking for it to be even worse. And the biggest problem I have right now, and I don't know if I'm stepping on y'all's toes or expanding on it, but as I understand the Biggers Waters Flood Act, once you claim a flood event, then your flood insurance goes to 100%. If it goes to 100% and you have flooded, you're going to be paying, from what I've seen locally from people that sold their houses, anywhere between $800 to $2,000 a month for flood insurance. Per month, depending on your home. What that is going to do is bankrupt that area, banks, mortgage companies, because people will walk away from their homes. They cannot afford a mortgage and flood insurance at that rate. We have got to reform that. We've got to give assurances to the people that they're not going to have to elevate their homes. We've got to give assurances to the people that their flood insurance is not going to become so onerous on them that they cannot afford to pay a mortgage. If it's truly a 1,000-year flood that we've heard, exempt them from the Biggers Waters Act. Do not penalize them for being flooded at a time when this shouldn't have happened. I could go on, as everybody here could. I see I've overgone my time. There's every personal story that you could want. You talk to us afterwards. We'll be happy to tell you about it. And I'm sorry I got off on a tangent on the issue of the interstate, but there is no doubt in our minds. I had a very renowned meteorologist tells me that anybody that looks at those pictures and says that that did not impact flooding is insane. So thank you.
Again, I thank each of you for being with us. Again, I came back just in shock, and this is about people and families and their lives just disrupted beyond anything we could imagine. The human toll is one of the greatest I've seen in anything. And again, having been on the panel longer than anyone around the country, in floods in the Dakotas, in Iowa, Missouri, up and down the Mississippi, in Louisiana, and many incidents in Florida. Never seen anything quite like this. We do need the flexibility with the federal programs to be able to address this type of disaster and others yet to come. We've got to learn from, we learned some from the mistakes of Katrina, but it doesn't appear that we've come that far. And I have some questions, and I'll lead off with those at this point. First, Mr. Robinson, representing FEMA, we had last week 143,000 claims. Is that correct? Is that up or down? Or
As of yesterday, 140,000 claims.
140,000. And how many of those have received any funds? At one time, they told me about 40,000 when I was there last week.
I'd have to get back for the record. There's
I think that's very important.
Over 590 million in
Pardon?
assistance. I have the dollars that have been provided. I do not have the number.
Well, they told me about 40,000, which is about a third of them had received something. And then I need to know the average amount of money, which you could divide by the amount of money given. Can't some of the staff behind him give him that information? Now, I think that's very important to come to the committee.
Yeah, as of this morning, the average was about $8,000.
But I'd like to know how many. And maybe you can reverse that and give us the math on that. Most disturbing to me is, and again, we went through this fiasco with the trailers that had formaldehyde, but we knew we had to have shelter for people. We still have 250,000 people displaced. And again, the wrong questions are asked. They're living with family. Some of them are driving all the way from the New Orleans area for shelter. It's a situation that is not acceptable. And when I asked to see what shelter FEMA had provided, this is more than 2 weeks out. Again, we had the one. You guys put up the one unit. Now, I was told there were 17 up, and the press accounts told me last weekend there were only 5 of these units actually up, and the others were on their way. Do you know how many modular units are up?
As of last night, we had 110 on site.
No, that's not the question I asked. How many are actually there and occupied, functioning for people?
I'd have to get back with you on that number.
No, that's not acceptable either. This is the one unit 2 weeks later. And again, the most essential thing is housing, and we had one unit, and that was told $60,000 for this one unit or more. That's a bigger unit. And that was the only one actually deployed and livable, somebody in it. We had 73 on the lot that I visited. They're lined up there. They told me they had 250 approved for placement, but they were not deployed. I asked the question, was there a contract in place to deploy and erect these? They said yes. So something's dramatically wrong. We'll be a month out on Sunday, and we have these units sitting there, only a handful deployed, and 250,000 people displaced. The other thing is these units are useless for 95% of the locations. They don't fit in people's driveway. The only place they could be deployed is to a rural area, and we had those incidents. We have 1,000, I'm told, on the way. But what are these people going to do in the meantime? This is not an acceptable solution. I talked to Administrator Fugate. It's not acceptable. Now, I know they can rent campers or portable units. Has any attempt been made to get that kind of equipment so that they could put them on site, stay there, and repair their homes?
Chairman Mica, there are several things we're trying to do. First and foremost, as the governor mentioned working with his program to do shelter at home.
Shelter in place, and I have questions about that. My question is, do we have other types of housing that can be located at the site where they can, to do the shelter in place, they've got to have a place to stay and live even while they're doing the repairs?
Under the rental assistance program, an individual can
rent is available, but again, has there been an effort made to get some types of units made available, either a call to the industry to help or anything? I asked Fugate about this because, again, they can get these houses back according to the program to shelter in place, but they've got to have a temporary place to stay.
Under the rental assistance program, a survivor can rent a travel trailer.
But that's not my question. Has there been an outreach? Is there a program? Is something online that tells them that this is an eligibility?
Our program, since it's for up to 18 months, we look at HUD-approved units, so they put people in safe and secure units.
That doesn't answer my question. The other thing, too, I heard, Governor, when I was there, is it took a long time to get the shelter in place. I think it was the incident was the 11th, the 24th. Was that the date that you finalized the shelter in place program? I think you testified to that.
I don't know if that's it. Sorry.
Well, again, I'm told it was the 24th. It was just before I got there, because I'm saying, why hasn't anything been done? They said that, well, the state has not approved a plan, and I guess I got there on Sunday. On Thursday, you had approved the plan, the shelter in place. I see.
Yes, but I would not characterize it. Nothing had been done before that.
Again, when I go to FEMA, they say, well, we have to wait on the state to have their plan. That plan was not. There was some delay. Usually when you have a disaster, within a week you get the assessment and a plan. This was a couple weeks in drafting. So I'm just telling you what I heard about excuses for them not deploying this faster.
Well, as you know, the Shelter at Home program is a state plan, but it is underwritten for the most part
by the federal government.
And so
they have to have your plan before they. I'm telling you the excuses they gave me. My job isn't to hammer you, it's to hammer the feds, but I go to the feds and they tell me the state hadn't responded in a timely fashion. I'm just telling you what they told me.
And I'd like to comment on that, Mr. Chairman. We developed that program jointly, and in fact it was with Administrator Fugate's first visit that we first discussed doing something like Shelter at Home.
But again, it didn't trigger the federal action for almost 2 weeks, is what they're telling me. So we need to look at some way to narrow that time frame in the future. Then one of the other things is I heard Mayor Sheldon and Landry, they both told me, Mr. Robinson, 21 days to have a contact with the officials whose communities are practically wiped out? And then when you get someone there, a contact, they have a contact that can't make a decision. It's got to be essential that we get with the community leaders in these programs in a disaster and identify a contact immediately. That did not happen, did it?
Sir, we put people in the Parish Office of Emergency Preparedness office.
Mayor Landry, didn't you tell me, how long was it before you got a contact? You held that slip of paper up in your office and showed me the name of the individual, and you just gotten that.
Yes, sir. It was in excess of 2 weeks, and it was a contact that was supposed to be assigned to me. One conversation on a Sunday afternoon, and have yet to hear back from that person since.
Yet to hear back from him. Mayor Sheldon, how long did it take you?
21 days. And let me state this. Being in contact with the parish officials does not drill it down into the local municipalities.
Right. Again, and you described the destruction in your community. Then, Mayor Landry and Mayor Sheldon told me we had no disaster recovery center. You had no disaster recovery center 2 weeks afterwards. Did you finally get one?
We did.
You did. But he had none. And then I went back to the field where we had these units, portable units, sitting in the fields. This picture doesn't show it, but there were multiple of these portable ones. And I went back and said, we need a portable unit in Denham Springs. That's not acceptable. And they're sitting in fields, not deployed.
Sir, there was about a 2-week discussion on whether or not we could have a DRC because we're in a flood zone.
Yeah. Again, and we've got a portable unit that was not, portable unit sitting, again, next to the trailers, or the modular units, saw them. Water. Okay, housing, then water. In Florida and other disaster areas, we were pre-staging water, one of the essentials to get to people, house, shelter, and water. I was told it was 4 or 5 days before FEMA water arrived. Is that right, Mayor Ramsey?
Yes, sir.
Is that right, Mayor Land?
Yes, sir. 5
Is that right, Mayor Sheldon?
I can't give you the date. I will tell you, had it not been for Congressman Graves, we would not have had water.
People and the Cajun Navy and the Cajun people were delivering and helping people get water, I was told, for days before FEMA's water, which is supposed to be pre-staged, ever got there. And I said, well, what was the problem? And they said, communications. Mr. Robinson, why couldn't we get the water to them that FEMA has pre-staged?
Sir, as I stated, we staged water and meals ready to eat in Camp Beauregard, which, in accordance with the state plan we worked out, the National Guard then distributes that water down to the local level.
What happened in not being able to get it to these communities? They told me it was a communications problem. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not, and I'll check that out.
We need to find out what went wrong. Yes.
I'd like to point out that at no time did anyone from FEMA contact me and say that water was even available. I had to go through Congressman Graves' office to get it.
Again, these are the basics. Housing and water are not there. We've got shelter, which we're paying $60,000 a unit or more, and $20,000 to erect them, and they don't fit at 95% of the sites, and we have a handful of them deployed. This is a pitiful federal response by any measure. We've got the federal regs, the little circle of going around about raising the houses now. Something's got to be resolved with that. I don't know if a waiver can be done. I talked to the ranking member. We'll talk to Mr. Richmond and others. But people are left in limbo because they don't know if they can rebuild their homes. People are walking away from their homes. I met at dinner with a young man who and his wife had just bought 2 years ago. That young people mortgaged the house up to the hilt because they're trying to get their own home. He doesn't know whether to walk, to turn the keys over to the mortgage company. He was not in a floodplain, has no insurance. It is a pitiful situation, and they relied on federal floodplain maps, and now The economic impact in this region is going to be devastating. That not only have they lost their homes, they're going to turn the keys in. The financing of houses, probably the depreciation, 25–30% of every home there because of what's happened. So homes will be they've been not only underwater, now they're going to be underwater and people walking away and the jobs. The recovery, like in Denham Springs, they'll lose 50% of those businesses will never come back. It's almost impossible. They lost their stock, they lost their location, and then there are no customers because people don't have jobs. Well, you can tell this is frustrating. We do have Mr. Graves and I think Mr. Cedric, Mr. Richmond. We have a CODEL going down to look at that. Governor Edwards, Administrator Fugay told me he could handle this within his existing budget. Now, I don't know about the CDBG grants, but that's what he had told me. So I don't know about whether we'll need that. There's lots of money available, I'm told. We'll have to sort that out. I'm not certain. And the CDBG grants is probably the fastest way to get some action because it comes to the local communities and they can eliminate the red tape and go for it.
And I would like to respond to that. The Administrator told me the same thing with the budget authority that he had pursuant to the previous appropriation for the agency. He can absorb the costs that are FEMA's costs, even at the 90% share. Yeah. But CDBG, that is not contemplated as being coming out of that.
Right, that's a different. Yes, there are different funds here. We've got some SBA issues. We've got, and I'm concerned about too. So I've gotten reports of possible fraud in some of the claims for food stamps and assistance, how that's being monitored, and cooperation even between state agencies is not what it should be, but we rely on the state for accessibility to some of those public assistance programs. That's got to be addressed, and we'll have some more questions on that. Let me yield now to Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off by recognizing former Senator Mary Landrieu, who's joined us. Welcome, Senator. Thank you. I'd like to sort of look at some of the issues. It sounds to me like FEMA has policies, much of it specified by Congress as to what you can do, what you cannot do. And I'm just trying to figure out if there are specific challenges that are affecting this particular recovery operations and what we in Congress can do to help you be able to do that. And let me just, I'd like to start off with the food and water issue here. Mr. Robinson, you said that the pre-positioning stockpiles of food and water are pre-positioned in conjunction with the state, and then the Louisiana National Guard actually is who deploys them. So did that happen? Were those stockpiles there, and were those stockpiles deployed?
Yes, we have meals and water in the state, and typically the way that occurs is the parish Office of Emergency Preparedness receives the request. They put it in an automated system called WebEOC, which goes into the State Emergency Operations Center. If they have those resources locally, they source those, usually task the Guard to deliver those resources. If not, then they ask us to provide additional assistance.
So, Governor, did the National Guard deliver?
Yes. And look, I am not going to quarrel with the mayors if they say they didn't receive water as timely as they wanted to. I will tell you there was not a request that came from a parish Office of Emergency Preparedness that was not timely responded to in full in terms of delivering water to the parish where we were asked to. And if there was a problem, it wasn't with the lack of water, it was with the lack of communication and coordination as to where that water needed to go. And that was one of the primary purposes of my visits to each of those parishes while we were still responding to get face-to-face, both with the parish president and the director of the Office of Emergency Preparedness in the parish, to make sure that their requests coming to us through WebEOC were being fulfilled. And never one time, in all honesty, did they tell me anything to the contrary. Now, I can't tell you that they got water. I can only tell you that we met every request that we got at the Governor's Office of Homeland Security for waters and for meals.
Mayor Schulten, did the parish leadership contact you or let you know that you could make the request for water and MREs?
Well, let me address that because I've only been mayor 2 years. During this process, we have discovered that once the administration changed from the prior mayor to this mayor, I was to be contacted by someone from FEMA to kind of give me an update about what to expect in case of an emergency. That was never done. I had no contact with FEMA until 21 days into this thing. So what I'm saying is I was not given the procedures prior to any event that would take place. So I had no idea that we could make those requests through the parish. I did call Congressman Graves. We did get water.
I think the Congressman Graves should be applauded for helping. Absolutely. But I'm still worried about the breakdown in communications, because if FEMA didn't come to you, but then the parish leadership apparently didn't brief you either that you could put in the request, right? Because it goes through the parish leadership.
I had been given a call by Joanne Morrow, who is fabulous in our mayor's office for the parish, to say that anything that we needed, let her know. Well, that's fine. That covers a broad variety of things. By that time, I'd already contacted Congressman Graves, and it was on its way.
Okay. Okay. Sounds like there are breakdowns both with the FEMA rep not briefing you, and then also with the local, state, and parish leadership as well, because you didn't get that information specifically that you could request it. I do also want to touch on one other thing before we return to this discussion, and that is Mayor Ramsey. I'm going to give you a chance in just a second, but I want to give you an opportunity to think about what you said, and I think it was because in the passion of the moment, in the frustration that you said that, yes, you've heard FEMA has improved since Katrina, but this isn't Katrina. These are blue-collar working folks who just want to get through their jobs, not like in Katrina. I don't think you meant to say that the victims in Katrina were not hardworking blue-collar families also.
No, ma'am. I meant this is a suburban community versus a city community, which it's a totally different individual that is traveling to their work. They don't walk to their work. They don't have issues. I would like to comment, though, if I may, on the last statement.
Sure.
On one of the biggest problems that we had was there was no communication. AT&T failed completely through Livingston Parish. There was no cell phone communication. Verizon was sketchy. AT&T was out. Getting into our parish communications center was very difficult, to say the least. They were overwhelmed. I know that when I finally got the National Guard to deliver water and MREs to Walker, they delivered it to a staging area 4 miles from where the disaster actually was. And when people have no transportation, it makes it impossible for them to get to that area to get the supplies that they need. I even tried to deliver, but then going back into FEMA regulations, they would not allow me to load up a city car with cases of water and MREs to take to the area. They said they had to be broken into individual bottles, individual MRE packets, and counted for each one they put into my vehicle before I could take it out of their staging center and into the area where the people needed it.
Mr. Robinson, are these FEMA policies, regulations, manuals, SOPs, same thing? Do you need something from Congress who said that you can put an MHU in a flood area so that you can put these people into housing, or that your staging center can actually break down cases of water, or don't have to?
So obviously on any disaster, there's lessons learned. I think one of the things, we work very closely with the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. We also have people at each of the parishes. So what you've heard today is how we typically see that process where the parish then makes the request, the state sources that. Just like the points of distribution being discussed here, those are typically run by the National Guard. We don't run those operations. So we certainly will circle back and make sure that we communicate that there's not regulations that we impose upon them.
Okay. Governor, do you have in your National Guard mobile deployed communication units? These teams that go out, because they've been deployed all around the nation now. These are mobile teams that go out and actually provide the communication nodes throughout a disaster. Do you have one of those in Louisiana? You should have I don't know if you do or not, but I would recommend.
Well, I don't know that we deployed any communications teams. We have an LWIN system that had 135 units. We never had less than 134 working throughout. And there was problems talking by cell phone, and I know that that's I see all the cell phones out on the table now, but the emergency folks, the first responders, never had a communication problem. But I will tell you, when the AT&T cell service went down, it impacted everybody, and it made things much more difficult than it would have been otherwise. But the emergency communications network performed very, very well. In fact, we probably have the best in the country because of upgrades after Katrina that we continue to invest in and to update every year. So I don't know that we ever deployed any National Guard communications units, but I don't know that it would have helped us in any way to do that.
Well, there are these units that the National Guard has, and they have been deployed now for, I think, over 18 months nationwide, actually a little longer than that, that actually come out and they send up a satellite shot, and they provide the mobile services, wireless, both for internet and also for cell phones, so that those in the local area, and if Louisiana does not have one of those, you might want to take a look
Yes, ma'am.
at requesting that. I just think that there seems to be breakdowns in procedures. And again, Mr. Robinson, you haven't really answered my question. Are there things that we in Congress can do to give you the authority, whether it is exceptions to policy, whether it is us asking the administration, the White House to give you exceptions so that you can do things like placing an MHU in a flood zone so that those folks who are affected can actually have a place to stay while they're trying to fix up their houses? Or is that something that FEMA can actually review its own procedures and do yourselves?
So, ma'am, to answer your question, obviously the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act are all things that this body did that helped us deliver our assistance and be more proactive. We are going to meet today, the mayors, myself, with the Associate Administrator for Flood Insurance and Mitigation, Roy Wright. We can place MHUs in a floodplain, not in a floodway, as long as we meet certain criteria. And we're going to talk through that today to make sure we're very clear on what we can do there.
Okay. So, are you going to have meetings with these mayors and the parish? It seems like there's a breakdown between the municipalities and the parish and the state and FEMA. FEMA and state seem to be working together very well. And you got kudos from, I think Mayor Shelton said that, wish there were more of you out there. But once you make that connection, it works. But he didn't know that he needed to send his water request up to his parish leadership. And that's a failure both of the FEMA representative, but it's also a failure of the parish leadership that didn't let him know either. So I sort of feel like there's somebody that needs to come in here and say, all right, we're all going to sit down at the table and we're going to figure out how we do this better. Is that happening?
Yes, ma'am. We have weekly calls that we're establishing with our mayors now. We've got a robust intergovernmental affairs to be able to provide a point of contact where we can work through things, and we'll continue to have our liaison at the parish office, making sure that they reach out and talk to the mayors on a frequent basis.
Okay, thank you. I've run over time. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize myself. Mr. Robinson, let me ask you a question. Every other person sitting at that table, and probably you as well, could introduce you to hundreds of people in their communities that will tell you a story that goes something like this. I have a home that is worth $200,000 before the flood. It's flooded and gutted right now. And so that home, flooded and gutted, pick a number, it's worth $100,000. It's going to cost me $80,000 to get it back in shape again. I lost all my clothes, that's going to cost me $10,000. I lost both my cars, that's going to cost me $40,000. All right, add these things up. You can throw in an elevated home, whatever you want to do. Without question, you're getting into six figures. The individual assistance cap on Stafford Act is $33,000. Is that correct? What do we tell those people? Is the Stafford Act sufficient to respond to this disaster?
So Congressman, I'd say that the assistance in disasters is multifaceted. So the Small Business Administration assistance, they may provide insurance, whether they be flood insurance, homeowner insurance, all those things come together to make someone whole.
Small business is a loan, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you're going to take on another liability. These people, you know, Congressman Richmond said it very well. They've lost it all. It's not debris, it's their lives on the street. They've lost everything. And they're going to take on another liability? Is this sufficient to respond to this disaster for this community to recover?
The continuum of assistance includes many things, and it could be faith-based volunteer organizations, or we've implemented our National Disaster Recovery Framework to look at philanthropic organizations and what they may be able to help us with as well.
We're going to donate in charity and volunteer our way out of the fourth most costly disaster in the United States history, flood disaster in United States history. That's what you're saying?
What I'm saying is it's a large event, and it's going to take the whole community effort to be able to help these citizens recover.
I mentioned, and this is a statistic coming from you, from the FEMA NFIP program, that believing, again, projecting this to perhaps be the fourth most costly flood disaster in United States history. The others would be Sandy, Katrina, and Ike. In those other three instances, were there supplemental appropriations requested?
I'd have to get back for you for the record.
I can answer that. It's yes. It's hell yes. You don't have a disaster like this and not step in and tailor the response. There is this unbelievable perception out there that the cost of inaction is free. Mr. Robinson, I'm going to say it again. Look, I'm very frustrated right now, and I'm not at you. I'm frustrated that Administrator Fugate's not here, or someone even higher, to talk about the recovery here. I mean, this is absurd that we're trying to use something that was created for preschool to try and address a college situation. The sideboards have been blown off the Stafford Act for this disaster. They've been blown off. This is an entirely insufficient situation. What are you going to tell that person that is sitting there that doesn't have the money in the bank and is facing a six-figure liability to get themselves back to where they were the day before the storm? What are you going to tell them? They've got their lives and they've got God. What are you going to tell them?
So we're going to work together with the state, the whole community, to try and help them on the road to recovery.
The governor's testimony indicated that he believed that there was an $8.7 billion, is that ballpark, Gov?
Correct, not including public infrastructure damage.
Okay, so in excess of $8.7 billion, and so we're going to depend upon volunteers and philanthropic organizations. The volunteers in Louisiana have been, and from other states, have been unbelievable in what's happened so far. The value of their work, I know that folks in the state are looking at this, but tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. If you valued the work that's been done on the rescues and the recovery work so far, unbelievable what they've done. It is absolutely unacceptable to think that we're going to find a way to charity ourselves out of this thing. It's not happening. I'll say it again. The cost of inaction is not free. We have two choices. We can get in front of this and design a recovery package that's tailored to this disaster to help provide a hand up to a community that doesn't ever want a handout. Or we can sit here and let mass foreclosures, bankruptcies, and you've heard them talk about it. Two of the mayors, I believe, mentioned 90% of their communities flooded. Mr. Robinson, let me ask you another question. FEMA, as I recall, over on North Sherwood, where you have some of the MHUs set up over there, staged over there, I think there's an adjacent area that appears to have some other trailers and mobile homes. Can you tell me what that is?
Some of the RV units that you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Those could be mobile communications platforms. They may be mobile units that we use for disaster recovery centers that are mobile as well.
Are there FEMA personnel that live or stay on that compound anywhere?
There's not.
There are no FEMA. Where are all the FEMA personnel staying?
They stay throughout the impacted areas.
In a tent?
Most of them are in a hotel, and I think most of our staff right now are staying either in New Orleans or Lafayette.
Okay, and where do their meals come from?
Excuse me, where do their meals come from?
Their meals. Where do their meals come from?
From the local community.
Mm-hmm. And who pays for that?
They receive a per diem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have hotels that are set up, and let's keep in mind, the hotel rooms aren't available for the general public. I mean, pretty much all the hotels are booked. So we have FEMA personnel that are staying in hotels They get a per diem for their meals that are covered. And all their stuff is set. Those guys are taken care of. That's not a worry that they have. Now, let me tell you about conversations with Livingston Parish Sheriff Jason Ard, East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff Sid Gautreaux, and Ascension Parish Sheriff Jeff Wiley. Their deputies are peeling off left and right because they don't have stability. These are the law enforcement community that are foundational to the recovery of these communities. And their deputies are leaving because they don't have that stability that your employees have. They don't have that. And so we've asked if they could simply have a compound that they pay for that, by the way, will save significant dollars as compared to other FEMA solutions. If they can have a compound where they can set up trailers and other housing opportunities for their deputies, and FEMA has been all over the place. I think I've talked to everybody from Homeland Security Secretary to some random person from Puerto Rico about it, and nobody can seem to give an answer. The law enforcement community needs the same stability. Look, keep in mind, they've lost everything they flooded, unlike your employees. They don't have that stability. They're peeling off and trying to find it because they can't stay in these communities. They need that stability. And to continue to drag these guys around, not give them answers and not give them what they want, when it's more cost effective and helps establish the rule of law, Mr. Robinson has said again, it's completely unacceptable. I know I'm going over time. Congressman Richmond, I want to just one more question, then yield to you. I want to ask one other question. Based on some of the calculations we've seen on the MHUs, these trailer units, you buy them, you transport them, you stage them, you set them up, you break them down. As I appreciate the cost per unit, when you add up all those costs, you're approaching $100,000. $100,000. The governor's program, Shelter at Home, which Gov, I've said before, I love the concept of that program. I think it's complementary to long-term recovery. The concept is great. Under the governor's program, they're capped at $15,000 per house. So let's compare that. $15,000 per house to help Shelter at Home. You're going to have $100,000 in a unit, in a manufactured housing unit. That's a lot of ocean. $85,000 in cost per household between those two. Why would you not give the Shelter at Home program more flexibility to help get these homes in better shape toward the long-term recovery? Give them $50,000. You save $50,000. It's a cost-effective solution for taxpayers. Why would more flexibility not be provided there? Why would you not let some people go to Home Depot or Stein's or Holmes or Lowe's and go say, hey, look, these 50 products are approved products for you to rebuild your home, and let them do it? I remind you, we had the Cajun Army, Cajun Navy, Cajun chefs, Cajun shelters. These people all did this on their own. Why would you not provide more flexibility to them again, more dollars and more flexibility? It complements the long-term recovery.
So we agree with you. I think the stay-at-home program is an innovative solution. What we're trying to do here is create that $15,000 in addition to somebody's repair money. So the governor's program can come in and make the home safe and secure, and then the repair money can be extended so they can make those permanent repairs to their home.
Yield to Congressman Richmond.
Mr. Robinson, let me just, is there a prohibition from FEMA that prevents money from being spent on permanent repairs and permanent housing?
So we have several authorities. One is for temporary sheltering, which some of our programs are being done now. The other is our temporary repair program, which provides funding for a homeowner to make permanent repairs to their home.
Right. My understanding is we had to be very creative with the shelter-in-place program because that there are strict guidelines that you all can't spend resources towards a person's permanent housing needs. For example, why we use travel trailers in trailer communities, because you couldn't spend money on them having a permanent trailer for the rest of their life. So I'm asking, does it come from Congress? Does it come from you all, this rule that you can't spend money on permanent housing?
So under the authorities for the governor's program, that is a sheltering program, so that is temporary in nature. It must be sheltering in nature. And there are 408 programs we can allow housing for up to 18 months.
You're missing my question. Is there a prohibition that prevents money towards going to a permanent housing solution, not temporary, permanent? So, for example, if shelter in place also meant putting back some sheetrock and some flooring, would that be prohibited because it goes towards permanent housing?
That would be allowed under the repair money that we provide to the individuals.
Under their $33,000?
Correct.
Now, let's get to that $33,000. Why is it, looking at all the damage that we have, why is the average coming out somewhere around $8,000? Right. So tell me what qualifies, because what the constituents are saying is that you all are coming in saying we'll only pay for essential needs, which means we'll pay for the master bedroom. If you have a kid, we'll pay for the kid's bedroom, but we won't pay for the guest bedroom because it's not essential. We'll pay for one bathroom because it's essential. We won't pay for the second bathroom. So with all the needs that we know are out there, how do we get to an average of $8,000 per structure or per person?
So under our programs, we're authorized to do emergency measures to make the home safe and secure and habitable. So it's minimal repairs.
No, I'm talking about the need, the FEMA assistance of the 33. What costs can be included in that? What can you cover in there?
Yes, so as I was saying, those are for the emergency repairs to make the home safe and secure and habitable. So
That's
it's not
it?
For permanent, it's not for the replacing everything that's in the home.
Well, see, now we're having problems then. This is what I don't understand. So if the governor has a shelter in place where they're going to make it safe and inhabitable and do all those things, so that person then does not qualify for any of the $33,000? What about clothing? What about all the other losses? I'm asking what losses can be covered by the $33,000?
So the personal property can be covered. One of the things we've done by allowing the governor's program is to maximize those dollars under the 33 so they can make repairs to the sheetrock to make the home livable in a more permanent fashion.
So why is the average $8,000? Everyone lost clothing. Everyone lost bedroom sets and TVs and all of these other things. How can we realistically say we have an $8,000 average if we're going in and truly evaluating their home? And at some point, I would like FEMA to just adopt a common sense test that the 1,000 inspectors that we have on the ground that we're sending out to everybody's home, even State Farm at some point during Katrina said, you know what, we're just going to look at a picture. And if we see water to the roof line, we're just going to assume it's a total loss. So why can't FEMA, instead of spending the housing, the money on 1,000 inspectors, make some very common sense conclusions that if you lost your house and the governor's going to gut it, you're going to need bedroom sets, clothing, and all of those things, and that costs well over $8,000. We're going to spend $30,000 to give someone $8,000. I mean, the question becomes, how do we get a common sense test so that you all would have the flexibility? Now, if you tell me you have the flexibility and you all are just not doing it, then that is a big problem for me. So how do we get a common sense test to quickly get money out to people? Because you're at $8,000. How do I get, let me just make my question very clear. How do I get people $33,000 very fast, since that's what you have the authority from Congress to give people? How do I get to $33,000? How do you give it out faster?
So, sir, we are looking at those emergency repairs. Our inspectors look at the verified loss to do those emergency repairs. Our programs are meant to be supplemental in nature to homeowners and flood insurance.
Okay. So if I don't have flood insurance, look, and I know there's some standard answers you have to give, but just work with me here. If I know there's a home, and I know that they don't have home flood insurance because they're not required to have it, then let's just agree that the win in hell policy is not going to cover anything, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if they don't have flood insurance, and they got 8 feet of water, can we just agree that they have at least $33,000 of damage?
each case is an individual case, and so what I would say is we get back to you and walk through that process on how we get to the inspections and the amounts.
And that's, I think, the problem that most people are having, because they lived through it. And I've lived through Katrina. I lived through Hurricane Isaac in St. John Parish, and now we're dealing with Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas, which is a very massive area. The question just becomes, we ought to be able to sit down in a room and figure out a way to expedite the funding and maximize. I mean, the frustration, I think, from people is that the federal government is trying to figure out a way to give as little as possible. And through Katrina, and Mayor Ramsey, I would just have to differ with you. I think these are the exact same storms. I think it's the exact same damage. I think it's water in a house 8 feet is water in a house 8 feet. People in New Orleans walk to work or drive to work. I think it's the same. My frustration is that we just won't, we're assuming that people are trying to scam the system. These are homeowners, hard-working people who have made the most responsible decision to purchase a home, and we're trying to figure out a way to give them the least amount as possible. They're not asking for an additional nugget at McDonald's. They're asking to be made whole because they find themselves in a predicament that was out of their control, that they had no fault in finding themselves in this predicament. And we as a government have an obligation to help. So part of it is if you and I have to go on a case-by-case basis to figure out a neighborhood where every house got $8,000, 8 feet of water, and we're trying to decide, since they didn't have flood insurance, whether they have $33,000 worth of damage, why can't we just sit down with a pen and pad and say, let's just take appliances at $4,000. Let's take per bedroom another $2,000. Let's take flooring. Let's take air conditioning. Let's take mold remediation. And at some point, we get to a number that's probably excessive of $33,000, and say at some point we ought to be able to look at the house, send the inspector out and say, ding, no flood insurance, this one qualifies, and just move on to the next one. That's what's hampering recovery, and without knowing that people are in this limbo. Now, we have work to do in Congress. We have to get a supplemental done. Without a supplemental, the governor will never have the ability to set up a program to match the unmet need that people are going to have. And that unmet need is calculated by what FEMA gives, what insurance gives, and what it actually costs to get back in your home. I lived it. I still do casework from Katrina. And what I'm telling you is we know that there's going to be an unmet need. So whether we give it through the $33,000 that we can give right now, we're going to have to give it through CDBG later to answer the same unmet need. Let's give the 33. It only reduces what we're going to give out when we get a supplemental. So we have to go work in a bipartisan fashion and get another $2 billion plus for Louisiana. And the question is, we would like to partner with FEMA and figure out a way that we can work to get people the money they need. If State Farm, that is driven on a profit basis, could devise a plan where they look at aerial photos and determine payouts or whether you've hit a max policy, and they're a profit organization, I think government, that our purpose is actually purpose, I think we should be able to do the same thing without people calling into question all of those things. And the last thing, Congressman Graves, and I'll close, is that what troubles me, and we even heard it today, what troubles me is the question about food stamps and fraud. If our first thought is always that American citizens are looking for a way to beat the system, then we're never going to make any progress. And if we try to devise a program that is fraud-proof, then you're going to see a program with so many hurdles that hard-working, honest people decide it's not worth my time. And Administrator Fugate should be here. But this also should be a full committee hearing and not a subcommittee with every member here, too. So as we talk about responses. I just want us to be fair and try to work in a way to just get people what we can give them right now, and then we will take our task of working in a bipartisan fashion to get the state the money it needs to make people whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond. I'm actually going to go to round two. Governor, let me ask you a question. Give you a magic wand, and let's put funding on the side for just a minute, but give you a magic wand if you could change 3 policy issues that you see as being impediments to the recovery. What are some of those things that you'd identify?
First of all, I know 3 things I would change. I don't know if it's policy or whether, because I've had continuous communications between myself and FEMA, whether it's Administrator Fugate, whether it's Tony, whether it's Jerry Stoller. I don't know quite often when there is an issue, whether it's because of limitation imposed upon the agency by law, which they have no discretion to waive, or whether it's a FEMA policy that they could waive. And so
okay, so let's include laws then,
yeah,
policies and laws.
Yeah,
so what are some of the things that you see as being obstructions?
Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think the manufactured housing unit program has been too slow. It hasn't been responsive. As to where those units can be placed, I still don't know whether that's a function of law or whether they have the discretion to place those in more locations. You know, I would tell you that I believe the shelter-at-home program, which, and I understand the chairman was talking about how long it took to stand it up. I will tell you, it's the fastest it's ever been done, and by a long shot. And so you've got an obligation to get it done as timely as you can, but also to try to make it as responsive as you can make it. But we had serious discussions about what habitable means. And for example, at the end of the day, because of a concern about duplication of benefits, which I think is probably statutorily driven, I wasn't able to give a full stove and oven and a refrigerator, so we settled on a mini refrigerator and a microwave. But that will be habitable. It won't be what I wanted for these individuals, but it will be habitable. But we were able to get there because we were talking, we were meeting. And so I appreciate the effort that they made. I thought the result could have been a little bit better. And thirdly, you know, I will tell you what I'm going to have to work on, because quite frankly, and I'm not here to defend FEMA. I'm not here for any other purpose, but some of the concerns that have been directed to FEMA by the mayors at the table, if there were problems, quite honestly, should have been directed at me and your parish OEP directors. Because I cannot imagine a system where FEMA delivers water to a mayor. I don't think that can work that way. They brought the water and the food to the state when we asked for it, in the quantities we asked for, and then it's my job using the National Guard and the Web EOC request format to make that happen. And if it didn't happen, that really is on me. But I would suspect it's a coordination and a communication problem, because again, there was not a single request that came to us from the parish OEPs that we did not fulfill in a timely way. But we have obviously some work to do to make sure that we know how to go about getting those resources.
Governor, thank you. I do want to make one personal note in regard to the framework. On Saturday night, just one quick personal story. Saturday night, I was out helping rescue folks and had been out there for probably about 16 hours straight doing rescues. And we had a guy that I'm fairly certain wasn't old enough to have a driver's license that was driving a school bus that I'm pretty sure he didn't have the keys to. And I'll tell you, I told that guy thank you 1,000 times, because he was shuttling some of the people we were evacuating after we brought him out in the boat over somewhere. But he disappeared. I don't know where he came from. He disappeared. He stopped running the shuttle. And so we got to the point to where we had, I'm going to guess, 30 people up on the road, up on Greenville Street. The road was flooded to the east. It started flooding to our west. We didn't have anything. So I'm calling folks. I'm like, look, I need a bus. Like, I just, I don't know if we need another kid to hotwire another bus or we need something legitimate, but we need something to get these people out of here, because the water's starting to flood on the other side of us as well. And I'm told, oh, well, you need to go on the Web EOC system. I got to tell you, I was about to take this thing and chunk it about as far as I could. And I'll tell you right now, these guys are in the same boat. they don't want to hear about Web EOC. And so I do think that, and look, I was in UCG, and I've been in that situation before where I wanted to, take EOC and shove it somewhere. But I do think that we need to talk about a more adaptable framework for people that are on the ground in waist-deep water and that have needs in some cases. So I just want to make that note.
And Congressman, can I make one more
comment?
Please,
please.
And it'll be brief. You're exactly right. The Stafford Act is insufficient. The amount of assistance that we're able to obtain.
See that, Tony? He can say it.
Well, no, but that's why I'm in Washington this week. I'm asking for additional help. We need to do the Comeet River Diversion Program. We need to erase the backlog of $724 million in emergency dollars through the Department of Transportation. We need the Social Services Block Grant for the mental illness problems that we're talking about so we can get those addressed. And most essentially, we need that $2 billion Community Development Block Grant Program so that we can try to go in and convince these people that the right thing to do is to stay in their communities, to stay in their homes, not simply walk away, leaving their employers without employees, leaving their businesses without customers, leaving their schools without students, leaving their churches with empty pews. We have to do that. And the quicker we can give them the peace of mind that help is on the way, even if the help itself doesn't arrive for several months, the sooner we can give them peace of mind that help is on the way, they will start making the decisions that they really want to make and that we want them to make. So that's why I'm here asking for all the assistance, and I appreciate your help and the help of Congressman Richmond.
Thank you.
And Congressman Scalise.
He hadn't done anything. Mayor Sheldon, let me ask you a question. We talked about ad valorem tax districts, and you have fire departments, you have sheriff's offices, you have levy districts, drainage districts that all have their entire revenue stream based upon an ad valorem tax. Can you just briefly describe the situation that this flood has caused for their revenue stream and the predicament that many of these entities are going to be in?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the assessors throughout the affected area are going to have to go back in and reassess the properties. And we've heard numbers anywhere from 75% to 50% reductions. That's going to be devastating to these agencies, school boards, fire, police, any agency that depends upon ad valorem taxes. As a city, we're fortunate that we do not rely upon ad valorem taxes, but I know that other cities do. And when you start taking that type of money out of those systems, we have problems for years, because it's going to take a while for those values to rise back up to an acceptable level before the storm. So it's not an issue that's just a one-time assessment. It's going to last for years.
So, and Mr. Robinson, I want to make note of this. Compounding the problems that these folks are already facing. Lost their homes, families don't have anywhere to go. In many cases, the schools are closed and flooded. And on top of it, losing their entire revenue stream, or a major chunk of it, because of the reduction in value in homes. Mayor Landry, let me ask you, going back to what I mentioned before, the question to the governor with a magic wand. You and I have talked about a lot of problems, and I actually going to spoon feed you one issue. These manufactured housing units are larger units. They're not the Katrina trailers, the smaller units that can fit. You represent a city. And these units, I tell you what, it wouldn't fit in my yard. It wouldn't. We don't have a big enough piece of property. Nowhere to put it. Can you have that magic wand? What are a few things you would do? And I would like you to specifically address that MHU issue and the compatibility with your city.
Well, as I understand, the MHUs are 8 feet wide and 42 feet long, which is probably one of the smaller units. Yeah, you're right. Most folks, especially in the older parts of town where some of the significant flooding was, probably only have a 50-foot wide lot. So they just don't fit. And you really don't want it, long ways across the front of the home, but whatever we need to do, we can do. A travel trailer is probably one of the better solutions. And I was told by one of our FEMA partners that there are several hundred of those travel trailers out. They can be hauled up here without a permit, without any kind of escort service down the interstates, and they can literally back them into somebody's driveway, have them hooked up and running in just a matter of hours. But that was a week ago. That was a week ago, and I called her again yesterday while we were on our way up here, and I said, where are the travel trailers? If you listen, and this is what she says, if you listen to the Garrett Graves 10 o'clock mayor's show that we participate in every week, we'll have some answers for you. No answers. And that was 10 minutes before the meeting. And we still have no answers. We still have no travel trailers. We still have no place for our folks to go live, period. One of my FEMA friends showed up about a week after the flood. Mayor, I need a block of 10 rooms in a hotel so I can bring some FEMA folks over here to go to work. I said, man, I wish I had 10 rooms to give you. I wish I had a hotel to even send you to. I had 9. All of them are underwater. Where have you been? Would you not pay any attention to what was going on in the national media? And you drive into my city and you want a block of 10 rooms? That is how ridiculous and how broken the entire system is. No compassion, no common sense. About 2 days later, 3 days later, another gentleman calls. Mayor, I need a place. I need 15,000 square feet of air-conditioned space so I can put a FEMA DRC. I wish I had 15,000 feet of air-conditioned space that I would give you. Now, you could set up in a parking lot somewhere. I could probably find you a spot. Oh, no, Mayor, it's too hot outside. Yes, sir, it is. How well do I know? But there's one young guy, Mark Wilson, I think he is. Him and I got together last week, and in a matter of about 48 hours, made the right contact, got a DRC at the Bass Pro parking lot, made one phone call to the store manager and one phone call to headquarters. Done, just like that. So you do have some good people, but the system is positively broken. No sense, no common sense, and very little compassion when you get on the street.
Thank you.
Right.
Mayor Ramsey, I just asked you to briefly answer the same question.
I would, with your permission, though, prior to that, since the Katrina comment issued a nerve, I want to make sure that they understand the context that was made in was that I was told by FEMA that they had learned many lessons since Katrina. This was in my statement that you can't use a cookie-cutter approach. You cannot use one method to make everything work. Katrina was different because the city flooded and everybody was evacuated, and it was weeks, if not months, before people were allowed back. The people in our area came back 2 to 3 days later, and FEMA was trying to treat it the same way. They did, they had days, weeks, months for some of the response to the homes in New Orleans. They don't have that in Livingston Parish because people are there gutting their homes 2 days after the water went down. And Mr. Richmond, in all due respect, it was not a reflection on the people of New Orleans versus the people of Livingston. It was the comment that was made to me by FEMA representatives that said they had learned so many lessons since Katrina. So I want to make sure that statement's straight and there's no misunderstanding. And yes, part of it is in the heat of the moment, sometimes things are said that aren't taken directly in context. I will confirm what Mayor Landry said. Mark Wilson has been very good to help us out. He's been frustrated. I didn't even get an assist center until I read on Facebook that they were putting one in Livingston. How many homes did Livingston flood? Do you know? I think there were maybe 3 or 4. I went over to the assistance center that was set up in Livingston. I walked in the room. There were 10 FEMA people helping one person. And I said, what the heck are you guys doing here? Why aren't you at Walker? I know you can't get to Denham yet, but why aren't you at Walker? We don't have a place to set up. You can have my courtroom. We can use your court right now. Come on. At noon, they were there. They helped 300 people in the next 2 days, and they were backed out till 7 and 8 o'clock at night, every night after that. My DRC only went up Sunday. Now, 3 weeks ago or 2.5 weeks ago, they asked me if I wanted a DRC. Yes, sir. You find me a location. So I found all of the dry warehouse space that we had left in Walker on Burgess or Florida, and I didn't hear back from them for a week. A week later, I called and I said, Mark, what happened to my DRC? Well, they're having trouble trying to figure out if these are usable. I said, well, that's not acceptable. Well, they sent somebody out. We reviewed each place. They rejected all of them. So they set up our DRC in Sidney Hutchinson Park on an asphalt lot with portable air conditioners. But again, it's 3 to 5 miles away from where the disaster hit. It's hard for people to get out there. So that's been my issue, is locations seem to be convenient for FEMA, not what works best for the area that you're in.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to recognize that we've been joining the hearing by Senator Landrieu, who I know has been in this exact situation in the past and worked tirelessly on the recovery of Hurricane Katrina, and certainly has some insight for many of us here today. Thank you for being here, and I want to yield to our distinguished Majority Whip, Congressman Scalise. And Congressman, Obviously, my earlier comments were in jest. We appreciate what you're doing. So I recognize the gentleman from Louisiana for questions.
Thank you, Congressman Graves. Appreciate the governor and our other panelists for being here. Obviously, over the last few weeks, we've been working, number one, to do everything we can to try to make sure that the federal agencies that are involved are doing everything they can. I think it's important to hear from the mayors on the ground about the challenges. And, you know, like every major disaster, each one's different. Clearly, this is a lot different than Katrina. I went through a lot of those issues as a state representative, but working on a lot of different problems. And ultimately, our jobs ought to be finding out what the problems are and breaking through the red tape. And there's been some red tape identified that we've got to keep breaking through. And we've been meeting as a delegation on a number of those issues with the governor. And our main objective is going to be making sure that the response that has to come from Washington, especially any congressional action that's required, is something that we come together on and then focus it on making sure it helps people get back in their homes. That has to be the top priority. And as we've been having our conversations, both going out in the field, and every time I've been out there, you learn new things, you find out other things that we can do to help break through that red tape. But then we've got to make sure that our response from Washington is targeted on responding to this storm in the most effective way, learning from other mistakes, which obviously over decades of disasters, including what we've experienced firsthand in Louisiana, that we don't make those mistakes again. So appreciate what y'all are doing. Continue to let us know how we can help you resolve those problems, because the problems are real. Many of these problems are solvable, and if agencies aren't operating in the most effective way to help you get the relief you need, we're all going to be united in making sure that gets fixed, and it's got to get fixed quickly, because, as you said, this isn't a case where maybe somebody waited 2 or 3 weeks and couldn't even get back in their community. People have already been gutting their houses 4 weeks now, trying to get back in, so the response is going to have to be targeted to this disaster in a different way and in a direct way. So I appreciate what y'all are doing. Continue to work with us. Let us know what we can do to help. Governor, we're going to continue meeting. I know we're going to be meeting again with you as a delegation in the next few days, and we will continue to be talking to our colleagues up here. And the good news is, as you see a disaster that shows the worst of Mother Nature, it also shows the best in people. And we've seen an incredible response. I've just in the last few days, we've been back up here, heard from so many members of Congress from all across the country, from both parties, that want to help us. And they sincerely understand what's happened and want to help. They don't completely understand the gravity, but they definitely understand that there was major devastation and want to offer any help that they can. And believe me, we've been making a list, but this is going to be something that we're going to all have to continue to work on and make sure that we get it right. So thanks for what you're doing. We're going to continue to work with you, and let's all work together to get it done the right way. Yield back.
Yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, for questions.
Let me just try to summarize where I think we are and where I think it would be helpful if we could go. The 3 problems or areas I see that are the most frustrating. One is speed, and things are getting done. 2, people having decision-making authority, being in the places they need to be. And 3, deference to our local officials, that they actually know what they're talking about. We're not actually part of the problem, we're actually part of the solution. So when a mayor says, hey, you can have my courtroom, or this spot would be very good for a DRC, it's because he knows it's accessible. He knows that people will go there, and he knows that he can get it up and standing tomorrow. And if I have seen the way that FEMA has worked with our governor, and it has been very good. But you can't run everything through the governor. I think that that's unfair to him, and I think that's unfair to our local mayors who are the closest to the people on the ground. And even the parish presidents. Some parish presidents are overwhelmed. Some parish presidents are, unable to do it. But the mayors are closest to the people in those communities. And if they have somebody who has the decision-making authority that when they make a call, like a location for a DRC, that what's wrong with deferring to them? If they make a mistake, it's the locals making a mistake. Let's actually give them the ability to make decisions so that we don't have to talk about 3 weeks of where the DRC is going to be. That at least those little problems can be resolved. The other thing is, Mr. Robinson, modular units could be effective in this particular storm. And I know that FEMA has approved modular units before. I think you called them cottages and other things. Can FEMA approve modular units for this disaster?
You're speaking other than the manufactured housing units we're bringing in?
Yes.
I have to get back with you on that.
Okay, let me just say modular units I think could get there faster. They can be part of a permanent solution sometimes. And they make a lot more sense when they're all done and we offer the homeowner the ability to purchase them, because then all of a sudden in the backyard they become man or woman caves, or they become deer stands, or whatever we can do. But we can get them there quickly, and they can be part of a long-term recovery. The second thing is, I'm told, and our research tells us that FEMA has utilized the practice that I talked about, that State Farm utilized, and it was called, you all use GPS and flood inundation estimates to come up with a damage assessment. Why can't we do this in this case in the areas that we know people didn't have flood insurance, and we can tell by GPS and the estimates and pictures about how much water they received?
So, Congressman, we have used that to expedite some of the assistance. So we expedited rental assistance, we expedited flood insurance claims based on looking at some of that geospatial information on flood depth.
Right, but not the homeowner damage or, and I guess I'm getting back to the same thing, and I don't want to keep doing it publicly. I'd love to be able to have this conversation in private so we can really delve into all of the things that we know houses that receive all that water have to do, and how do we get that money to them quickly, and then Congress working with our governor to do it. One other thing that I want to make clear for the record, because our mayor's talked about raising homes and all of those things, which actually come under mitigation. We're not saying we don't want to mitigate. What we're saying is we want to mitigate in a very smart way, which is if we do our co-meet project and other things, we will manage the water that we receive so that even a 1,000-year storm, we can survive. But that makes a lot more sense to manage water and create flood management areas better than just coming in saying the simple way to mitigate is to everybody raise your house. In New Orleans, we built in the Corps, and Congress appropriated the money with a lot of Mary's help. They came in and built a flood protection system, and that worked. So what I'm saying is we're not afraid of mitigating, and we're not asking for you all to treat us any differently and not mitigate. What we're saying is we have some of the best engineers, and we know that if we do co-meet and some other things, we will mitigate this from happening again. We just don't think you put the onus on the homeowner to raise their homes and do all those other things. And with that, Congressman Graves, I'll yield back, but I am interested in having a long discussion about the average payout and how we can't expedite some of that.
If you have time, I'm going to do one more brief round. Yes, request unanimous consent for Representative Scalise's comments to be entered into the record without objection. Mayor Shelton, let me ask you a question. We've all heard about this elevation of home issue that may be required for folks that are in the floodplain that have experienced significant damage. What happens when we elevate homes and businesses all over the place, but we have a flood?
You're going to have a worse flood. you're going to have little islands in these neighborhoods.
What happens to their cars?
They're going to lose the cars again.
What happens when they need to go to the grocery store or to their job?
Can't get there.
Does that sound like it makes sense? Or do you have an alternative solution?
Yes, let them build back where they are. Like Congressman Richmond said, this is a 1 in 1,000-year flood, and we're going to do other things to mitigate flooding issues. To put this on the homeowner is, it's sad. It's sad. They built their homes according to the plans at the time. Now we have one storm that's going to change everything that may never happen again in lifetimes to come. It's just not the right thing to do.
And so I assume build back where they are and build the Comey project.
That's what I'm
plus
saying.
the other.
Listen, the Comey, and I didn't realize we were going to get into the Comey River Diversion Canal, but I could talk all day about that. I have stated time and time again that I lay this flood and what has happened to it and the damage at the feet of the people that are dragging their feet to get that canal built.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. Mr. Robinson, I want to go back to the sheriff housing issue we discussed before. Can you tell me when this issue is going to be resolved and approved?
So I'm working with Jim Wascom from the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. He and I had a discussion last night. We're working on that again today.
But let's be clear. I don't want you to pull the governor and his staff into this thing. This is not their decision. This decision is FEMA's decision. Is that correct? They're not holding up anything.
We're going to work very closely with them to identify
is the state holding up anything here?
It is not.
Okay. I just want to make that clear. Okay. So could you please answer?
So we're going to identify the need. What's the need that we can't solve outside of our individual assistance program? Right now, we currently have a contract for those deputies to stay in a hotel that is paid for by the state, which FEMA is reimbursing, and that is through September 30th. 2016, and we'll work to get a resolution on this as quickly as possible.
If you can save money, provide a more stable, preferable environment for the law enforcement community, why would you not do that? Why would you not honor the request of the sheriffs?
So we're going to work to identify what the needs are. One of the things we want to make sure is we don't provide funding.
They've already identified a plan. They've identified the plan. They've proffered that to you. We've been talking about it now for over a week.
So we want to make sure that the individuals that go in there would be eligible to receive our assistance so we don't end up with a recoupment issue that may come back later.
So we're going to continue to have a bleeding of deputies leaving the forces, the law enforcement community, continuing to have this instability in their lives while you continue to plow through this. You don't think that the sheriff is in touch with his deputies and is aware of their situation better than FEMA?
So we're going to continue to work with the sheriff, the state, and we'll update you on where we're on the status is.
Can you just tell me when an answer is going to be made?
I'll have to get back with you on that.
I think it's ridiculous. I do. I think it's ridiculous. This is why people get so frustrated and why there are T-shirts that use alternative acronym for FEMA on Bourbon Street. This is why. Let me check and see. I want to make mention that this whole rotating FEMA officials and comparably rotating answers from FEMA officials is unacceptable. The mayor of Zachary told me, if I remember right, that he is on his 70th FEMA official that is his contact since Hurricane, I think it was Gustav, 70th, 70. It's just ridiculous what goes on, and the inconsistency of answers, the inconsistency of treatment of folks that are already in a crisis type situation. And I want to recognize Mr. Richmond for closing remarks, or questions or closing remarks.
Well, Congressman, I might be able to help you with that last one. If we give some of our federal workers a raise, we might be able to keep them around a little bit longer. Let me add just a couple things, and part of what we find is that FEMA is terrified to do things because they're worried about what the IG is going to come back later and say. And Congressman Graves, I think we need to figure out a way to rein in the IG in terms of decisions that are made by FEMA in an emergency. And Senator Landrieu will know this, but We have to give FEMA the benefit of the doubt that the decisions they make during a storm are right and proper, and then that way when our sheriffs are asking for a trailer park or any other thing so that they can put their first responders, we don't need the IG coming back 2 years later saying, well, we looked at every officer and this officer's damage didn't quite meet the criteria, so we need you to go recoup the money. And Mr. Robinson, those types of things, you're the person that can tell us that. You're the only person that can really tell us where your red tape is based on reluctance to take a chance because you may get spanked by the IG 3 or 4 years later. Senator Landrieu and I had to pass legislation so that the IG and FEMA didn't come back years later to recoup money from Louisiana citizens who, through no fault of their own, didn't provide one false document, didn't answer any question incorrectly, but received benefits because of FEMA's determination. The IG asked FEMA to go back and recoup all of that money from Louisiana citizens. And those, we cannot be paralyzed by the fear of the IG coming back a couple years later. And if there is something we can do to help with that, please let us know, because I'm willing to take it on. And it's not about fraud and abuse. It's about giving FEMA the discretion to make decisions without fear, because fear is holding up this process. Governor, let me just give you a chance to close. And is there anything we talked about today that you need that you didn't get a chance to more fully go into besides the CDBG, the social service block grants, Comeet River funding, and the transportation backlog? And let's be clear about that $740 million. We're not asking for that for Louisiana. The problem is that is a backlog all around the country, and we're now at the end of that train. So by helping us, you're going to help all the other states that are ahead of us in order to get to us.
Correct. And I appreciate the opportunity to say this again. We want the assistance that we need through the Community Development Block Grant Program and the other items that you just mentioned to fully recover as soon as possible, but also to give to the people of Louisiana the peace of mind to make decisions now, knowing that help is on the way. And the longer we procrastinate in moving a supplemental appropriation for this Community Development Block Grant Program, for example, the more people, unfortunately, who are going to make decisions that it just isn't worth their while to stay in their communities, to stay in their houses, and we will see a much longer, harder road to recovery than we should have. So I appreciate the opportunity to.
And Mr. For all of the mayors, because I think that, of course, that I'm right when I say that you're the closest to the people, because you live in the communities, you eat in the communities, and you talk to everybody, and you go to church with them. Do you agree with the governor's assessment that inaction by Congress or slow determination of a supplement or a CDBG is going to damage the long-term recovery of Denham Springs, Central, and Walker?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We can't stand any delays. We need things sped up.
People need some reassurance that there's a hope, that there's a future, and they need it now.
Thank you. And I'm glad that the chairman is back, because I want to publicly again thank him not only for having this hearing, but thank him for actually coming down to view the damage while, unfortunately, when this storm happened, the world was paying attention to the Olympics and a contested presidential debate, and you took the time to come down, and your visit highlighted it, and this committee hearing will also highlight it to the country that this was the 4th largest event, and there are over 100,000 people that are truly affected by this incident who, but for a 1,000-year storm, would not find themselves in that place. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I thank you and Mr. Graves for your leadership on the ground. I can't imagine as a member of Congress having this level of devastation in my district. And again, what I saw was people not whining, people who stepped up to the plate. It was the local citizens, the local leaders that put this together, and they had learned some from Katrina, and they went in and they gutted their houses. Of course, they lost their possessions and their dreams and their hopes and everything that you work your life for, and they're so stoic. They joined together, helping each other. They've saved the shell of those homes, but we have no program in place to help them really with housing. That's still a huge deficit. What we saw, the federal response was just unacceptable with housing. We've got to learn from, again, the staging of water and other essential. I can't believe that went south on us in this instance. We have the other thing, let me just say this too, Mr. Robinson. I talked to Administrator Fugay also about this. There are 143,000 claims, but people cannot find out where they stand. Now, in this day of electronics, most of them have mobile phones. They survived. Some of them don't have access to a computer, but can get to one. But they can't find the status of their claims or talk to anybody. You dial the numbers that are given, and you find someone, and they're manned by people who don't have a clue of where their case is. So for them to get their home and their act together and the lives back together, they've got to know the status. They've got to get an answer. They're not getting those answers, okay? And I don't know why we can't have an app that tells exactly the status of their case, the information that's being inputted. We have the case descriptions. I see Mr. Matthews out there, the staff director of the Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management Subcommittee on Transportation. But we need a requirement almost for the agency to have some means of people finding out where they stand. They can't go to a bank. They can't remortgage. Should they put the money in the house to repair it under the plan that's being provided? They just don't know, and we don't communicate. Getting those disaster relief centers also to the shelters. They finally, I think, some of them came. But we were transporting people to trying to transport them to some locations. They got no decisions there, back and forth. There's a three-ring circus trying to get answers, and no one had the answers. So in this age of electronics, we could get some of that data up, do a better management of their cases. And then the flexibility. I don't know if will a waiver work, Mr. Robinson, to assist these people on this unique basis. Will a waiver work? I mean, do you have the capability of waiving some of the requirements Mr. Richmond talked about, changing the Stafford Act? Do you need, and I discussed with Ms. Duckworth, can we send you a letter saying that we would request waivers on this? Do you have that ability under the law?
Sir, we have made some unique changes to allow the governor's program. We have expedited assistance under the flood insurance program to expedite claims data.
Well, I want by Monday a list of any changes you see that the law does not allow you to deal with this unique type of disaster, okay? By Monday at close of business. I want to see from FEMA what's missing. Do you know, it doesn't appear that you have the information, but do you know that under the reserves that we have for FEMA for disasters, that this size disaster can be handled with the programs that you have with existing reserves?
Based on the information today, we do have the funding that we need.
Okay, that's what the administrator Fugay had told me. Now, that does not include CBDG, which is under HUD. Our subcommittee has authority under HUD, and I'll direct staff to look
at the CBDG, the reserves that they have, and the ability to shift funds into CDBG to meet that on an immediate need. We're struggling to fund the new fiscal year, which starts October 1st. It's going to be, unfortunately, a couple weeks before we get in place a CR. Mr. Graves and Mr. Richmond and the Louisiana delegation need to immediately address the leadership, and I know they're working on this, and the appropriators to make certain that those funds are available immediately, if not sooner, either in a transfer from existing accounts. I don't know what their reserves are, but that would help with the CBDG grants, which is probably the fastest thing. And these local leaders can get that out and into place. But we do need to look at all the things that went wrong. The modular units, Mr. Matthews, the staff director, we need to have a round table as soon as possible and find out how it could go so wrong to end up with 1,000 or more of these units, which is just, it's nothing to deal with the size and scope of this problem, and then the cost, the inapplicability of the location of these units, the whole, and then the staging. What do we have? 17 units up. It's absolutely pitiful. So those are some issues that have been raised. While we may seem critical, yes, we are critical because we're entrusted with the people to help the people who need our need in time of a natural disaster, and it hasn't worked that way. We've got to work to get it right. And then finally, Mr. Graves and I flew over the canal. What's the name of the canal? Comey River. I call it a canal. That's $123 million or whatever it is, $1 million project, which would probably prevent this happening again if we'd spent the money, and it's decades that the project has sat there. So it's a Corps of Engineer project. Mr. Graves, Mr. Richmond, I think that needs to be addressed through transportation appropriations, and which underneath that is the Corps of Engineers Water Resources Subcommittee. I talked to Chairman Schuster, Mr. Gibbs, and others, but then we also have to go to the appropriators because they're authorizers to make certain that the funds are available so that this natural disaster doesn't occur in the future, and I think that might be beneficial to do that. So there are a host of issues that have been raised today. This is, again, one of the greatest human disasters to befall the United States in a generation or more. We need a better response. We still have people without homes. We still have people in need. We still have a huge challenge before us. I can't thank the mayors enough for their leadership. What you did on the ground, long before the federal government was there, in working with your citizens in your communities. Thank the governor for coming today and being part of this. And I challenge FEMA that we've got to do a better job in meeting our federal responsibility. Mr. Richmond, any comment? Mr. Graves? Again, I thank everyone for being with us today, for your testimony, and again, your participation. I just saw our Vice Chairman came in. We apologize also. The remembrance ceremony for the victims of 9/11 took place on the Capitol steps a few minutes ago. So we've had a disruption in the regular order of business. So we will not be here on 9/11, and that's part of the reason that members have come and gone. Mr. Vice Chairman, did you have any comment, closing comment?
No, I'd just like to thank the witnesses for appearing here, and certainly very helpful.
Thank you.
And again, I thank Ms. Duckworth and the minority for working with us. This isn't a partisan issue in any way. This is an issue that has affected hundreds of thousands of great Americans. I thank you again for being with us and coming. We've got some work ahead of us. We all will pledge to work together. There being no further business before the subcommittee, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
I got 3 working I'm not going to. I'm hoping
So that wraps up this hearing looking at the FEMA response to recent flooding in Louisiana. If you missed any of this program, we'll have it available for you to view online shortly at cspan.org. And we've got more live programming to tell